You've been carrying too much. The tension in your jaw, the racing thoughts, the heaviness in your chest you can't explain. They told you to push through, to hustle, to be strong. But no one taught you how to rest. No one told you that letting go is also strength. You lay in bed, eyes closed, body still, but inside, you're reliving the past, fearing the future, drowning in invisible noise. Here's the truth. Peace isn't found by running faster. It comes when you stop running, when you finally breathe, when you allow yourself to just be. And that's what this is. Not a bedtime story, not a list of tips. This is a reset for your soul, a 3-hour journey through ancient wisdom and calming truths designed to help you release what's weighing you down. You'll learn how to let go, not just in theory, but in your bones. Through the stillness, through the breath, through the silence that speaks louder than your overthinking mind ever could. As you listen, something inside you will begin to shift. The noise will fade, the tightness will soften, and a calm, steady presence will rise within you, one that's always been there. You just forgot how to hear it. Tonight you remember, tonight you return to yourself. So, get comfortable. Let the outside world wait. It's time to come home to peace. Are you ready? Let's begin. Everything you didn't say today lives somewhere inside you. The tension in your shoulders, the sigh you didn't finish, the way your thoughts return to one unfinished moment again and again. It doesn't need to be loud to keep you awake. Quiet weight is still weight. And what no one teaches is how to put that weight down without needing to solve it all. That's what we're about to do. Not by fixing, not by achieving, but by ending the day with full awareness. There is an art to how we close, and most people were never taught how to do it gently. That's where the struggle begins, when a day ends, but your nervous system doesn't get the message. Right effort isn't about doing more, it's about doing wisely. In the teachings of the Buddha, it's not the busyness of action, but the quality of your energy that matters, especially at night. Especially when your system is craving peace and you're still living mentally in unfinished conversations, to-do lists, and thoughts that never slowed down. Right effort at night means letting go of the idea that the day needs to be tied up like a perfect ribbon. It means accepting that closure is not a perfect ending, it's an intentional one. There's a big difference. One tries to control every detail, the other allows space for truth. As the day fades, your body wants stillness, but your mind keeps refreshing. That's where effort becomes suffering. The false idea that peace only comes once everything is finished. But you'll never finish everything, and you were never meant to. That's the gift of impermanence. It teaches you that things end not because they're broken, but because they're part of a larger rhythm. The mind clings to what's unresolved because it believes that by thinking more, it's being responsible. But the deeper responsibility is knowing when to rest. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, energetically. Effort becomes right. Effort when you recognize that sleep is not a pause in your life. It's part of it. Something sacred. Something that requires care. You can't enter deep rest while gripping tightly to the thought that there is more you should have done. Letting go doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've realized that caring also looks like release, also looks like softness, also looks like saying, I did what I could, and that is enough for today. So much of stress is not the moment itself. It's the resistance to the moment. It's the belief that something should have gone differently, that you should be somewhere else by now, that your current state is a mistake to be corrected instead of a reality to be accepted. When you let go of that resistance, space opens. In that space, clarity begins to speak. There are so many small rituals that can become sacred acts of closure if done with awareness. Washing your face at night isn't just hygiene, it's a way to say goodbye to the day. Turning off the lights isn't just utility, it's a sign to your nervous system that you're entering a new state. Even lying down becomes a ritual when it's done with full presence. These acts stop being routine and start being spiritual when you bring mindfulness into them. That's what right effort really asks of you. Not to do more, but to do with more care. There's a kind of tension that builds up in modern life that doesn't have a clear outlet. It's not dramatic enough to cry over, not urgent enough to scream about, but it lives in the background. It hums beneath your thoughts. You carry it into bed, and then wonder why you can't sleep. It isn't loud, but it's heavy. The antidote isn't to fight it, it's to acknowledge it, to notice with honesty where you are still gripping, still striving, still running in circles, trying to finish a race that doesn't even exist. Closure starts when you sit with the truth of how things are without trying to change them. You take a breath and say, this is what the day was. This is how I feel. And that's okay. You don't need to rehearse tomorrow. You don't need to rewrite today. You need to return to now, over and over, with tenderness. Right effort also means knowing that your energy is limited, that you're not a machine, that depletion is not a badge of honor. You can't offer peace to others when you don't allow it for yourself. You can't show up fully when your system is wired with tension and fatigue. Rest is not just recovery, it's fuel for your compassion. In Buddhist teachings, there's no shame in being tired. There is only awareness. Are you using your effort for clarity, or are you using it to cover up discomfort, chase validation, or resist rest? The answer lives in your body, your breath, your state, not in your checklist. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is allow things to be unfinished. Not because you gave up, but because you're wise enough to know that some things complete themselves when you stop interfering. There's wisdom in pause, growth in quiet, power in stepping back. It's not about perfection. It's about sincerity. Maybe you didn't meet your goals, but did you show up? Did you try? Did you learn something? Did you care? That matters more than metrics. That's the kind of success your soul understands. As you let go of the day, allow a kind of gratitude to form, not forced positivity, just simple recognition. Something in this day held you. Something allowed you to make it to this moment, even if it was hard, even if it wasn't pretty. There is still value in what happened. And as the breath slows, you begin to feel how little effort is needed to rest when you no longer resist. The body knows how to release. The mind knows how to settle. You just have to stop interrupting the process with worry. Let thoughts pass without feeding them. Let emotions surface without suppressing them. Let the body soften in its own time. Rest isn't something you have to earn. It's something you return to. It's always been yours. What makes closure hard is the fear that if you let go, you'll lose control. But you never really had control. You had choice. You had intention. And now you get to choose softness. Now you get to intend peace. The more you allow yourself to stop reaching, the more you feel what's always been within reach. A quiet stability, a rooted stillness, a sense that you don't have to try so hard to be okay. You already are. Right effort honors cycles. Just as there is time for movement, there is time for rest. Just as there is time for doing, there is time for being. When you try to carry daytime energy into nighttime stillness, you create friction. Closure is what smooths the transition. Letting the day go doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. It means placing it down with care, saying, "Thank you, that was enough," and meaning it. Somewhere inside, you've already been waiting for this permission, not the kind that tells you what to do, but the kind that whispers, "You don't have to keep holding everything." And as you follow that voice, you'll notice your nervous system respond. Breath slows, shoulders drop, the space between thoughts grows wider, and peace moves in, not because you forced it, but because you made space. This is the heart of closure, not completing every task, but ending the day with intention, not ignoring what was difficult, but acknowledging it without clinging, not rushing toward the next thing, but fully arriving where you are. You are not late, you are not behind, you are exactly where you're meant to be, resting, releasing, restoring. Let that be enough. Let this be closure. Let now be the place you begin again. Letting go in the mind is one part of rest, but there's another layer, quieter, deeper, less obvious. It lives in your shoulders, your back, your stomach. It pulses behind your chest and rests in the curve of your neck. Thoughts can be reasoned with, but the body stores what words never could. This is where many get stuck. They speak about peace, but still feel unease. They meditate, but something inside still clings. Because you can quiet the mind and still carry unrest in your tissue, in your muscles, in the memory held beneath the skin. What the mind forgets, the body remembers. Long after an event has passed, the residue can remain. That residue has a name, samskara. It's the subtle impression left by every experience, every thought, every emotion not fully processed. Over time, these imprints accumulate. They shape how you react, how you hold yourself, how you breathe. They influence posture, sleep, digestion, and even the expression on your face. And while they may seem invisible, their effects are felt daily. Liberation begins when we learn how to let these patterns unwind. Not by pushing, not by controlling, but by tuning in. Bringing attention back into the body in a way that's gentle, clear, and present. It is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's so subtle that you barely notice it. A small tremble, a sigh, a shift in weight. A muscle you didn't realize had been clenched for years, finally softening. Mindful movement becomes the language of release. You're not stretching to become flexible. You're moving to become free. You're not breathing just to stay alive. You're breathing to send messages of safety. You're not sitting still for performance. You're resting so your body can speak. Each breath, each motion is a dialogue with the nervous system. When done with awareness, movement says, "I'm listening. You can let go now. You're safe." And slowly, the body begins to trust. For many, the body was once a battlefield, a place that had to endure, perform, hide, survive. So it learned to store, suppress, armor. Mindful movement teaches it a new way. It teaches presence. Presence tells the body, this moment is different. You are not where you were. You do not need to carry the past into now. Samskaras don't release all at once. They unravel in layers, and the body decides the pace. Some may open with a single deep exhale. Others may take years. What matters is your willingness to feel without rushing. Your ability to stay with what rises without turning away. You don't have to understand the story behind every imprint. You don't have to analyze every sensation. Sometimes all that's needed is attention. Compassionate, steady attention. Noticing where there's tightness, following where there's flow, allowing movements that feel intuitive rather than correct. There are gestures your body longs to make but has forgotten. Not the structured poses of exercise, but the natural instinctual expressions of presence. Rolling the shoulders slowly, letting the spine sway, rocking side to side, letting the jaw drop open for the first time in days, yawning fully without holding back. These are the body's ways of saying, I'm starting to feel safe again. When you practice mindful movement regularly, the body becomes more honest. It starts to show you what it's held. Trembling after a long silence, tears that arrive unexpectedly, breath that feels unfamiliar. These aren't breakdowns, they are breakthroughs. They are signs that what was once trapped is beginning to shift. Breathwork is part of this release. Not just shallow breathing, but full, present, conscious breath. Breathing into the places that feel numb. Exhaling where tension has taken root. Letting the breath meet each part of the body with patience. Some areas might not respond right away. That's okay. The breath isn't forcing anything. It's offering space. Awareness deepens with slowness. The slower you go, the more you feel. The more you feel, the more you heal. Moving too fast pulls you back into patterns of effort and escape. But slow, steady attention invites stillness. Stillness isn't stagnation. It's clarity without resistance. It's the moment where release becomes possible. This is why somatic awareness is so important. It brings healing into the body. It reminds you that not all wisdom is mental. Your muscles carry memory. Your fascia holds emotion. Your bones echo stories you never voiced. And when you begin to explore your body with curiosity rather than critique, it starts to soften. It starts to tell the truth. You may notice postures that don't feel right anymore. Movements that once felt normal now seem forced. That's a sign of evolution. Your body is learning how to move from awareness instead of habit, from freedom instead of fear. Movement doesn't have to look like anything special. It can happen while brushing your teeth, while walking to the kitchen, while sitting on the floor. Every gesture becomes an opportunity to reconnect. Every breath becomes a chance to choose softness instead of tension. Trust deepens the more you listen. If you're tired, lie down. If your breath wants to deepen, let it. If your fingers twitch, Allow it without needing to explain. The body speaks its own language. Presence is how you learn it. At night especially, these practices carry power, because that's when your defenses are lower. That's when your awareness turns inward. You begin to feel what you numbed during the day. So instead of shutting it down, create space for it. Move slowly, stretch gently, breathe deeply. Let the day exit your body, not just your mind. Stored emotion can leave through movement. Fear exits with the tremble. Sadness exits with the sigh. Anger exits with the release of tension. The more you move with intention, the more you allow the body to complete cycles it never finished. That's what trauma is, an incomplete process. Movement helps finish what once got stuck. There is wisdom in your spine, your hips, your gut, not symbolic wisdom, real, cellular knowledge. When you tune into it, you stop treating the body like a machine. You stop ignoring the parts that hurt. You begin to include them, to honor them, to ask, what do you need right now? That question alone can shift everything. Sometimes the body answers with stillness. Other times, it wants movement. The key is to respond with kindness. No demand, no performance, just truth. That is the core of healing, letting your body be fully honest without punishment. You were never meant to live only in your head. You were always meant to feel through your body. Your nervous system knows how to regulate. Your breath knows how to restore balance. You just have to remember how to trust them again. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about becoming less burdened, less armored, less interrupted. The more you release, the more your natural state shines through. Calm, present, connected. That's what was underneath all along. Release is not dramatic. It's rhythmic, subtle. It builds over time, through repetition, through tenderness, through willingness to stay present with the discomfort until it shifts. And it always does. When you allow your body to express, something else opens too. Your heart, because they're connected. Stored pain in the body affects your capacity to feel deeply, to love fully, to trust again. And when that physical tension begins to dissolve, the heart softens. Relationships change. Self-talk changes. The way you see the world changes. This is why this practice is essential. It's not just for stress relief, it's for liberation. Liberation from old responses, old stories, old ways of being that no longer serve. Liberation that starts from within and ripples outward. And you don't need to be skilled. You don't need to know yoga or dance or anything structured. You just need to listen. Move slowly. Breathe. Stay present. That's enough. That's more than enough. Let this be your offering to yourself, not another thing to do, but a way to return to wholeness. Let it be sacred. Let it be personal. Let it be true. You deserve to feel what it's like to live in a body that isn't bracing itself. That isn't waiting for the next blow. That isn't holding on for survival. You deserve to live in a body that feels like a home. And that begins now, with one breath, one movement, one moment of letting go. Let the imprint dissolve. Let the weight leave. Let the presence deepen. You are not what you carried. You are who you become when you let it go. When the body begins to soften, the breath slows and your inner space clears. Something unexpected starts to happen. Thoughts rise, not chaotic ones, but old ones. Stories you've repeated, roles you've clung to, identities you've been wearing for so long you forgot you could take them off. It's quiet now, and in that quiet, they become loud. This is the moment where presence asks for something deeper than stillness. It asks for honesty, not the kind you speak to others, the kind you whisper to yourself when no one is listening, the kind that's raw, that doesn't try to sound wise, that just tells the truth. Reverse journaling begins here. Unlike traditional journaling, where you list what happened or what you plan to do, this practice is about subtraction. Instead of tracking your wins or defining your goals, you let the page hold what you're ready to release. You don't chase the self you want to become. You meet the self you're done pretending to be. You write not to affirm, but to let go. This isn't about organizing thoughts. It's about excavating what weighs you down. Thoughts that loop endlessly. Beliefs that used to protect you but now keep you small. Attachments that feel like comfort but cost you peace. The Buddha taught that attachment is the root of suffering, that clinging, even to the good, leads to pain, because everything changes. And when we try to hold what is meant to pass, we suffer. Reverse journaling is the practice of setting those attachments down on the page so you can walk forward with less. It's not always obvious what you're attached to. That's why writing helps. The page reflects what you might not have noticed. A repeated phrase, a pattern of fear, a need to explain yourself. When you write without a filter, your unconscious reveals what you haven't had the space to say out loud. Start simple. You can begin with the phrase, "I release," and let your hand move. Don't judge what comes out. Don't pause to make it beautiful. Let it be messy. Let it be real. You're not documenting your life. You're clearing the space to live it. Maybe you release the idea that you have to be productive to feel worthy. Maybe you release the need to be understood. Maybe you release an old version of yourself who needed to survive in ways that no longer serve you. The power isn't in how well you write. It's in how deeply you feel what's written. This practice is like opening a valve. What's been trapped finally has a way out. You don't need to understand every word. You don't need to interpret every line. The act of writing is enough. It moves what's stuck. The more you write from release rather than achievement, the more you start to feel lightness. You begin to see how much of your stress comes not from life itself, but from the attachments you place on life. Expectations, titles, outcomes, roles, control. You write to unhook from these, and over time, something subtle shifts. You stop writing to fix yourself. You start writing to meet yourself. You begin to notice the voices in your head that don't belong to you, the ones that sound like pressure, the ones that demand perfection. You put them on paper, you look at them, and you decide they no longer get to live inside you. This is not just emotional, it's physical. As you let go on the page, the breath changes, the tension eases, your body responds. Because letting go is holistic. You don't just release mentally, you release somatically, spiritually, even energetically. Reverse journaling makes that process tangible. You can burn the page afterward, tear it, crumple it, or keep it. There's no right way. The practice is not in the outcome, it's in the act itself. In the decision to meet your truth without decoration, without the pressure to be positive, without the need to solve. just being honest, completely, without fear of judgment. Sometimes you'll write the same sentence over and over. That's okay. Repetition is a sign of imprint. Some attachments are layered. They've lived in you for years. They don't dissolve in one moment. But each word is a crack in the armor. Each line is a breath of release. You'll notice over time that the voice on the page changes. At first, it may sound like resistance, then grief, then clarity, eventually space. You may even stop needing to write. You may sit in silence and feel the release inside your body without saying a word. But until then, the page is a safe container, one that holds everything you've carried without asking you to carry it any longer. This practice also builds trust. Trust in your own presence, in your own capacity to hold truth. You begin to see that what you feared confronting is not as powerful as your willingness to see it, that the things you avoided weren't too big. You just needed a way to meet them gently. There's no need to write for anyone else's eyes. This is not a performance. This is a mirror. The more honest you are, the more free you feel. You may find that what you release changes daily. One night it's fear of being left. The next, it's pressure to be strong. Another time, it's the guilt of resting. The practice meets you where you are. It evolves with you. It reflects your inner world without editing it. Over time, you may begin to release things before they settle in. You'll notice when you're gripping. You'll feel the impulse to control and choose to soften instead. Writing becomes less of a task and more of a ritual, a way to return to center. And you don't need long. Sometimes a few minutes is enough. A few lines that clear the fog. You don't need to write an essay, just enough to hear yourself without noise. This is not journaling for planning. This is journaling for emptying, to create space, to feel less full of things you never meant to carry. And once that space is open, something new can enter. Insight, clarity, calm. You don't have to try to create these. They arrive naturally in the absence of clutter. There's something powerful about giving form to what was once formless. A thought held inside feels heavy. A thought written down feels seen. And what is seen can move. What is acknowledged can change. You may notice a pattern of attachment to outcomes, wanting things to go a certain way, feeling safe only if the future looks how you imagined. Reverse journaling helps you loosen that grip, helps you realize that you can still care without clinging. That freedom doesn't mean detachment from life, it means detachment from fixation. Some nights, the release is quiet. Other nights, it's emotional. Both are valuable. Both are real. There's no better or worse. There's just presence or absence. And you always have the power to return to presence. Write without goals. Write without purpose. Write just to see what rises when you don't censor yourself. Let the page carry what your body has held. Let the ink speak what your voice could not. Let your honesty be the practice, and let your practice be enough. Because you are not what you write. You are the space that holds it, the presence that observes it, the awareness that sees without judgment. And the more you release, the more you return to that spacious self, the part of you that is not burdened, that is not striving, that is simply here. This is where peace lives, and every time you pick up the pen, you return to it, word by word, breath by breath, truth by truth. Let it flow, let it leave, let it be gone. You don't need to carry it anymore. When the weight of what you've let go begins to settle, you don't always feel lighter. Sometimes you feel space, a strange, unfamiliar space where the old emotions used to live. The voice of release grows quiet, and you notice something deeper beneath it. Not pain, not joy, just stillness. And that stillness can feel confusing. You're not suffering, but you're not celebrating either. You're not full, but you're not empty in a sad way. You've reached something more primal, something beyond thought, something silent. This silence is not nothing. It's not a void in the way the mind fears. It is fertile, alive, a kind of inner night that holds more truth than all the thoughts that came before it. And here, you're asked to do something most people avoid, to stay, to stop searching, to be with the quiet and let it speak. This is where the practice of honoring darkness begins. In daily life, darkness is seen as something to fix, escape, or illuminate. Light gets all the praise, the brightness of answers, the clarity of knowing, the comfort of direction. But in many wisdom traditions, darkness is not the enemy. It is the mother of light, the container where all new things are born. In Buddhist teachings, this is known as shunyata, emptiness not as lack, but as possibility. This emptiness is the canvas where the self is undone, the noise dissolves, and insight quietly rises without effort. Most people fear darkness because it threatens identity. It holds no mirrors, no reinforcement, no tasks to prove worth. It strips away what's external and leaves only the presence that remains when the masks are gone. That kind of quiet isn't passive, it's radical. It asks you to rest without distraction, to sit without knowing, to breathe without control. At first, it may feel uncomfortable. The ego is used to doing, to planning, to knowing what's next. Darkness offers none of that. Instead, it offers stillness with no agenda, time with no goal, space without measurement. This is the practice. Let the darkness hold you, not as something to endure, but as something to enter willingly. Let yourself notice what arises in the absence of stimulation, without the phone, the task, the sound. In that absence, deeper things become visible. You notice your thoughts slowing. You notice your breath as it actually is, not as you want it to be. You notice the pace of your heart, the weight of your body against the bed or floor. You return to reality, but not the external kind, the internal kind, the one that doesn't change with the headlines or your inbox or your schedule. This kind of darkness has its own intelligence. It reveals things gently, not through concepts, but through sensations, flashes of insight that don't come from thinking, but from listening, from sitting in the unknown long enough to feel what lives there. It is here that clarity begins, not all at once, not with fireworks, but with quiet certainty, the kind that doesn't explain itself. It doesn't arrive with language. It arrives with presence, with depth, with the sense that something has shifted, even if you don't yet know what. The human mind resists this. It wants categories, answers, light it can hold in its hand, but the truths that matter most often rise from darkness. They emerge like roots, hidden but strong. They reshape how you move, not with force, but with depth. Honoring darkness means allowing space for not knowing, not rushing to explain, not needing to define. It means stepping back from your own storyline and being with whatever is there. That includes the parts of you usually edit out, the grief that hasn't spoken, the ache with no name, the questions with no answers. These are not problems. They are part of the terrain. They are signs that you are real. Silence is not the absence of meaning. It is the absence of noise. And from that quiet, meaning has room to arise naturally without being forced. There's wisdom in closing your eyes at night and not immediately filling the space. Let your mind rest in the dark. Let your thoughts slow without trying to control them. Let the quiet deepen. This quiet is not emptiness in the way the world defines it. It is fullness in disguise. In Buddhist thought, shunyata is not void. It is the space in which all potential exists. It's the field where you can release your grip and know that what matters will remain. The practice of honoring darkness is not dramatic. It's subtle. It asks you to sit with the absence of feedback. No one is watching. No one is grading. You are alone with your awareness. And what you find there is what you truly are when nothing is performing. Stillness is not stagnant. It's transformative. But only if you stay long enough to feel it. That feeling is not always peace. Sometimes it's discomfort, restlessness, boredom, the mind grasping for something to do. That's okay. Let it grasp. Watch it without following. Over time, even the grasping quiets. And what's left is space, not empty space, sacred space. This is not about transcending or floating away. It's about dropping down, grounding into a presence that doesn't change with emotion or thought, a self that doesn't need decoration, a state where you don't have to prove anything. When you allow yourself to rest in darkness without trying to fix it, you begin to feel safety that doesn't depend on light, that doesn't depend on mood, that simply is. This kind of presence makes you resilient, not in a hard way, but in a quiet, stable way. You become someone who can sit through anything, not because you don't feel, but because you've made peace with not needing to escape. Insight arises not when you chase it, but when you stop grasping. It rises from quiet, from inner stillness, from space. The more you allow space to exist without needing to fill it, the more you begin to feel clarity where there used to be noise. You stop reaching for the next answer. You begin to rest in the question itself, and eventually that question softens. It stops demanding a conclusion. It becomes a doorway instead of a wall. Darkness becomes not a place to fear, but a place to return to. A place where truth speaks without needing words. A place where the layers fall away and what's left is real. The mind wants to label. This is bad. That is good. This is useful. That is waste. But the wisdom of darkness teaches you that meaning is not always immediate. That what seems useless can become vital, that what feels empty can be the source of everything. This is why stillness is a teacher, not loud but true, not flashy but deep. When you sit in darkness long enough, you realize you are not alone there. You meet a deeper part of yourself, the one who does not need to be seen to be whole, the one who does not need approval to feel enough. That part of you was never gone. It was just buried beneath the brightness. Let the dark hold you, not as a problem, but as a companion. Let yourself dissolve into the silence and find that something is still here, something that doesn't move when thoughts move, doesn't shake when emotions shake, that something is you, that something is presence, that something is the foundation from which real insight can grow. You don't need to light every corner of your mind. Some parts are meant to rest in shadow. Some truths bloom in quiet. Some strength is built not in effort, but in surrender. So surrender to the stillness. Honor the space. Trust the darkness. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's real. Stay with it long enough, and you'll find it's not empty after all. It's full of everything you forgot to feel, everything you never had time to process, everything you pushed aside to keep going. And when you meet those things without flinching, they soften, they transform, and you do too, because darkness isn't here to scare you. It's here to show you what remains when everything else fades. And that is where real clarity begins. When you've sat long enough in the quiet, when you've allowed the darkness to hold you without judgment or resistance, something changes. You begin to sense that you're not falling apart. You're falling into place. The grip loosens, the striving fades, and what's left is a still awareness that feels strangely familiar. Not the kind of awareness that thinks, the kind that watches gently, knows quietly, waits without rush. From that space, your relationship to night begins to shift. The hours ahead are no longer a blank void of unconscious sleep. They become a continuation of practice, a new canvas for awareness, a softer field where seeds can be planted without distraction. Sleep becomes a gateway, not an escape. This is where dream rehearsal begins. In most lives, the boundary between waking and sleeping is abrupt. One moment you're scrolling, planning, worrying. The next, you're trying to switch it all off and fall into rest. But the mind doesn't work that way. It carries momentum. Thought continues even after the body stills, and dreams are often shaped by the last impressions held in consciousness before sleep. Which means your dreams are not random. They are reflections of the emotional tone, focus, and internal narratives you bring into the night. Instead of surrendering to random mental noise, dream rehearsal offers a different approach. It is the intentional act of shaping your final thoughts, your final emotions, your final inner focus before sleep, so that the mind continues to move in that direction while you dream. Rooted in the Buddhist practice of bhavana, or mental cultivation, this is a way of planting seeds with care. You choose where to rest your awareness. You decide what impressions will be the last ones to touch your inner world before you drift. This practice is not forced. It's not about controlling what you dream. It's about guiding the emotional current that flows through your dreams. It's a gentle steering, not a grip. And that shift, small as it sounds, can shape not just your nights, but your days. Because dreams don't just reflect the subconscious, they also affect it. The mind processes memory, emotion, fear, and intuition while you sleep. And when you enter that process with intention, you can begin to transform from within. The starting point is presence. Before bed, before your eyes close, you pause, not to scroll, not to analyze, just to center yourself. to become aware of the thoughts that have been running all day, and then, slowly, to step back from them, not because they're wrong, but because they're no longer needed. Next comes emotional alignment. Ask yourself what emotion you'd like to carry into the night. Not what you're feeling right now, but what you want to cultivate. Peace, forgiveness, gratitude, courage. You breathe into it. You hold it gently in the heart. You don't force it. You simply invite it. You let it begin to color the space inside you. Then you bring your attention to a theme. It could be a question you're holding, a quality you want to understand more deeply, a relationship you'd like to heal, a fear you're ready to release. You don't try to solve it. You simply hold it with presence. You let the question rest in your awareness like a candle, soft, unassuming, and you trust that the dreaming mind may move toward it in a way that your waking mind cannot. If this is new, it may feel subtle. You may wonder if anything is happening, but the work is internal. It doesn't need validation. Over time, the practice begins to reshape your inner rhythm. You begin to notice that dreams carry more meaning. You may wake with insight that wasn't there before. You may feel lighter, more resolved, even without clear reasons. That is the fruit of mental cultivation. Some people choose to write before sleep. A few words to ground their focus. A sentence of what they're releasing. A reminder of the quality they want to grow. The act of writing helps set the intention in place. Others speak a phrase aloud. A mantra, a wish, a prayer. Even a whisper is enough. What matters is sincerity, not complexity. You may also visualize, not to force imagery, but to gently evoke it. A place that feels safe, a symbol of healing, a face that carries kindness. You hold it in your awareness with tenderness, letting it settle into your consciousness like a gentle imprint. Not a story, just a feeling, a tone, a direction. Bhavana is not about suppressing thought. It's about redirecting energy. It's about choosing what grows inside you. And in this case, it's about choosing what you sleep with, not physically, but emotionally and mentally. Over time, this becomes less of a technique and more of a rhythm. Your nights become less reactive, less random, more aligned with your deeper self. Dreams begin to feel like conversations with your own unconscious, not chaotic but insightful, not jumbled but strangely wise. And even when dreams are challenging, they don't shake you as much, because you've entered the night with grounded awareness. You're not at the mercy of your mind's debris. You're actively tending to the garden of your sleep. This practice also builds relationship with intuition. Because the dreaming mind is less filtered, it often reveals truths you weren't ready to see during the day. When you rehearse dreams with intention, you open a line of communication with deeper parts of your psyche, and they begin to speak. You may begin to wake with clarity, not always logical, but felt. You may feel nudged toward decisions that you resisted before. You may sense forgiveness where you once felt resistance. These are not accidents. They are the results of quiet cultivation. Compassion also plays a role. You may rehearse dreams with the intention to meet someone with understanding, to release resentment, to speak what you didn't get to say. The dream becomes a sacred space for that healing to unfold. Not as a substitute for waking life, but as a space where the heart can soften without interruption. Insight comes not just from reflection, but from openness. When you sleep with a mind that is open, soft, and directed with care, you create space for insight to arise without force. Dreams can carry messages, images, symbols that speak louder than words, and the more present you are before sleep, the more clearly you hear them. This is not about controlling sleep. It's about meeting sleep as a partner, a sacred transition, a space for transformation. And even if you don't remember your dreams, the practice still works. The mind processes in layers. What you plant before sleep affects how you wake, your mood, your thoughts, your energy. The deeper self is listening, always, even when you don't consciously hear it. Over time, sleep becomes something more than rest. It becomes a temple, a place where you meet yourself more deeply than in any mirror. A place where you dissolve the self you performed all day and return to the self that simply is. Dream rehearsal isn't about doing more, it's about doing differently, with care, with clarity, with love. It's a small shift that creates deep change, a quiet act that speaks loud in the soul. Let your nights be sacred. Let your last thoughts be gentle. Let your heart soften before sleep. Let your inner world be shaped with kindness. What you give to your dreams return to you. Let it be peaceful. Let it be wise. Let it begin tonight. The more intentional you become with sleep, the more you realize how much of life isn't about control. It's about relationship. Your relationship with silence, your relationship with time, your relationship with uncertainty. And one of the hardest relationships to make peace with is the one you have with your own limits. Not just physical ones, but emotional, mental, and circumstantial. The things you cannot do, cannot change, cannot reach, at least not yet. These limits often feel like failure, like something to fix, stretch, or overcome. But what if they weren't flaws? What if they were teachers? This is where gratitude begins to shift everything. Not the kind of gratitude that only celebrates comfort, not a list of things that went well, but a deeper kind, a kind that includes the things you resisted, the things you called inconvenient, the ones that stopped your plans, the ones that made you feel small. This gratitude takes courage because it asks you to see clearly what you cannot change and still bow to it, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. Limitations shape us in ways freedom never could. They focus our energy. They help us choose. They define where we begin and end. And when you stop fighting them, you begin to understand what they've been teaching all along. Patience, presence, compassion, simplicity, surrender. Upekkha, equanimity, is not a numb or passive state. It's the peace that comes from full acceptance, not resignation, not defeat, but a kind of knowing that all things rise and pass, including your limits. Even boundaries are impermanent. Even struggle shifts shape. Nothing stays locked forever. So instead of bracing against what restricts you, you start to soften into it. You begin to ask, what is this showing me, rather than, how do I escape this? Limitations reveal the truth about your needs. They point to the areas where you've been pushing too hard, where you've forgotten to breathe, where your expectations have outpaced your energy. They are the body's way of reminding you to return to balance. They are not punishments, they are signals. When you feel blocked, there is usually something deeper happening than mere inconvenience. Often, a limitation protects you from something you're not yet ready to carry, or it slows you down just enough for something more important to catch up. If you pause long enough to listen, the block speaks. It says, stay here, look again, rest, rebuild, rethink, realign. But we rarely listen because society teaches us that worth comes from movement, from achievement, from constant improvement, and so limits feel like shame, like something that reflects your failure to keep up. But the truth is, no one can go beyond their limits without damage. Growth takes time, expansion requires pause, and not everything needs to be possible in order to be valuable. Some doors stay closed so that you can finally look inward. When you begin to thank your limits, your whole nervous system shifts. You release the constant tension of proving. You stop needing every moment to produce more. You recognize that value is not in doing more than others. It's in knowing when to stop, when to rest, when to say no. There is strength in knowing your edge. Wisdom in not pretending to be endless. That's where self-respect grows. Not from pushing beyond yourself constantly, but from honoring where you are fully. And what you find, paradoxically, is that limits, when accepted, become fertile. They become creative, they force simplicity, they inspire focus, they bring clarity. When everything is possible, energy scatters. When you accept what's not available, your attention deepens, your appreciation grows. Gratitude for limits doesn't mean you never grow again. It means you trust the timing of your growth. You understand that expansion is not always up to you, that some growth happens underground, in silence, in waiting, that some things are preparing you before you even realize it. You begin to see how your greatest wisdom often came from the times when you were held back. The insight you carry didn't come when everything went your way. It came when you had to find meaning without answers. It came when the path was blocked and you had to stand still long enough to hear what you'd been missing. And over time, equanimity grows. You stop needing life to be smooth in order to be calm. You stop needing everything to work out before you feel peace. You begin to hold joy and disappointment in the same breath. You don't push away the hard, you hold it with grace. This is the root of real strength, not in overpowering obstacles, but in meeting them with eyes open. In sitting with life as it is, without tightening your grip. That's what freedom actually feels like. Not endless options, but inner stillness, even when options narrow. When you're grateful for your limits, you stop arguing with the moment. You stop needing it to be different in order to feel okay. That's not giving up, it's waking up. And from that wakefulness, new kinds of freedom appear. The freedom to rest, the freedom to say no, the freedom to choose with care, the freedom to be fully where you are without apology. Gratitude brings ease, not because it fixes what's hard, but because it shifts how you relate to it. You stop seeing yourself as a victim of circumstances. You start seeing yourself as a participant in a sacred unfolding. You stop waiting for the right conditions to feel whole. Wholeness includes edges. It includes walls. It includes pauses. You don't need to break through everything. Sometimes you just need to notice what's already here. Even pain can be met with thanks, not for the suffering itself, but for what it reveals, for what it softens, for how it humbles and sharpens you. Gratitude doesn't make pain disappear. It gives it meaning. It turns discomfort into insight, scarcity into presence, Limits slow you down enough to savor. When you can't do everything, you start to notice what matters. When you can't move fast, you start to feel what you were rushing past. Gratitude says, even this has a place. Even this is part of the path. Even this is enough. And when you see that clearly, when you meet your life with open arms instead of clenched fists, something shifts. The mind quiets, the body loosens, the heart rests. This is what equanimity looks like in daily life. You stop resisting every stop sign. You start listening. You begin to see that not getting what you want is not always a loss. It's a redirection, a recalibration, a hidden grace. Limits remind you that you are human, and being human is not a flaw. It's a doorway into compassion, for yourself, for others. Everyone is limited in some way. Everyone is doing their best with what they have. When you accept your own edges, you become gentler with theirs. This is not complacency, it's deep maturity. It's the wisdom to know when to try harder and when to let go, when to push and when to pause, when to act and when to be still. And in stillness, gratitude deepens. You begin to thank the quiet, the not yet, the not now. You begin to find beauty in what's incomplete. You begin to see that even limitation has movement, that boundaries shift, that pain evolves, that nothing stays forever, not even the things that feel stuck. This knowing changes how you live. You move with less force, speak with more care, breathe with more awareness. You begin to shape your life not around what's missing, but around what's here. And in doing so, you find that you already have more than you thought. Gratitude for limitations is not natural in a culture of endless striving. It takes practice. It takes pause. It takes choosing to look again, to soften, to listen. But the reward is profound. You become someone who doesn't need life to bend perfectly in order to feel peace. You carry peace with you, in your breath, in your gaze, in your way of being. This is real freedom, not the absence of limits, but the presence of grace within them. And from here, the next moment arrives, not because you chased it, but because you were present enough to meet it, fully, softly, ready. When you stop resisting your limits and begin to honor the pace of life, something unexpected begins to shift. You no longer fight the slowness. You no longer panic at the pause. You realize that not everything must be stretched, fixed, or accelerated. And in that surrender, you begin to meet something even more subtle, the pressure underneath everything. The mental race against the ticking of time, the feeling that you must hurry, that you're running out, that you must be somewhere else, someone else, doing something more. That pressure has a name: time anxiety. It creeps in quietly, often unnoticed. It doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it just sounds like a whisper that says, "You're not there yet," or "You should have done more by now," or "What if it's too late?" That whisper grows louder in silence. It grows stronger when the day ends and you're left alone with your thoughts. It tightens the breath, sharpens the mind, and keeps you stuck in a constant loop of reaching. Not because you're lazy, not because you lack direction, but because you've been taught that the future holds your peace, your worth, your answers, and so you chase it. Tomorrow, next month, next year, the version of you who will finally be settled, accomplished, fulfilled. But the closer you get, the farther it moves. Because the mind cannot land in tomorrow. It can only imagine it, and it imagines it endlessly, feeding the illusion that time is your enemy unless you control it. But time was never the enemy. The illusion was. Buddhist teachings offer a clear lens to view this. The three marks of existence, impermanence, suffering, and non-self, reveal the roots of this tension. The first, impermanence, reminds us that nothing lasts. Not the moment, not the thought, not even the fear. Everything is in motion, constantly changing. When you try to hold on to what shifts, you suffer. When you demand permanence from what is designed to move, you feel pain. That pain often shows up as anxiety about time, the desire to hold on to youth, to rush results, to prevent loss, to preserve certainty. But all of this is built on a misunderstanding that you can somehow outthink impermanence, that you can control the future through worry. You cannot. And that's not a tragedy. That's a doorway to freedom. The second mark, suffering, arises when we resist this truth, when we grip what is fleeting, when we demand stability from a world that flows like a river. Your mind is not broken because it plans or fears. It's conditioned that way. It learned to treat the future as more important than the present. But every time you feed that belief, you rob yourself of the only thing you ever actually live. Now. The third mark, non-self, dismantles the belief that there is a solid, unchanging you that exists across time. You are not a fixed point moving through a timeline. You are a process, a constantly evolving presence. Who you were is not who you are. Who you are is not who you'll become. And even that future self is not more real than the breath you're taking now. Time anxiety lives in the belief that your value increases the more you achieve in less time. But value doesn't live in urgency. It lives in awareness, in presence, in the quality of attention you give to each moment. The pressure to move faster, to get more done, to plan everything perfectly, is built on the illusion that life is a race with a finish line. But there is no finish line. There's only the ongoing experience of being here. You don't win life by hurrying, you miss it. The irony is that the more you try to control time, the more it controls you. You rush through joy, you delay peace, you base your self-worth on imaginary deadlines, and slowly you disconnect from the very life you're trying to make meaningful. Freedom doesn't come from better time management. It comes from stepping out of the trap of time altogether. Not by ignoring the clock, but by relating to it differently. Time is not your master. It is a measure, that's all. You are not late. You are not behind. You are here. Anxiety thrives on imagined futures. Presence dissolves it. Because in presence, there is no room for the stories of what might go wrong. There is only the simplicity of breath, of body, of now. That is the only moment that ever unfolds. That is the only place where peace can live. Letting go of time anxiety doesn't mean becoming careless. It means becoming clear. It means noticing when your mind pulls you away from the present and gently returning, again and again. Not because the future is bad, but because it isn't real, not yet. The only place to shape your future is here. Every time you pause, every time you breathe deeply, every time you slow your step, you are breaking the spell. You are reminding your system that peace is not later. It's already available. You just have to stop running past it. This kind of slowing takes courage because the world praises urgency. It tells you to hurry up and fix, accomplish, climb, but stillness offers something different. It gives you your life back. Not the fantasy of what it could be, but the truth of what it is. That truth is where real change begins. When you stop rushing to escape discomfort, you meet it with awareness. When you stop chasing ease in the future, you begin to cultivate it now. You learn to sit with what is, without waiting for it to change. And that changes everything. Because the mind that's fully present doesn't fear time. It doesn't measure worth by hours or years. It sees clearly that the past cannot be fixed and the future cannot be known, and that both are just thoughts, projections, not places. Your breath is not in tomorrow, it's here. Your peace is not in later, it's here. The more you anchor yourself in this knowing, the less you fall into the old pattern of reaching. You stop needing to be somewhere else to feel okay. You stop needing to have everything figured out. You stop delaying life. Time becomes soft, spacious. It stretches around you instead of pushing you forward. You begin to feel that you have enough, even if nothing has changed on the outside, because inside you've let go of the demand to be somewhere you're not. Let that be your practice. Not to stop planning, but to stop worshipping the plan. Not to ignore time, but to stop believing that time defines you. Let presence become more important than productivity. Let awareness matter more than achievement. In that space, suffering loosens, fear quiets, and the self, no longer gripped by future or past, begins to dissolve into something wider, something deeper, not a story, not an identity, but a living experience. The present moment becomes enough, not because you forced it to be, but because you stopped measuring it and started living it. When the mind finally stops racing forward, when you've let go of the pressure to arrive anywhere else, a new kind of space begins to open, quiet, unfamiliar, soft. At first, that space can feel strange, even empty, but slowly, with patience, it starts to speak, not in words, but in feeling, not in ideas, but in resonance. You begin to sense that silence isn't the absence of experience, it's the purest kind. A presence that doesn't shout, a clarity that doesn't push. And as you enter that space, you find something even more surprising. The way into silence often begins with sound. This is not ordinary sound. It's not noise or distraction. It's not for stimulation or escape. It's sacred sound, the kind that doesn't fill your mind, but clears it. The kind that doesn't entertain you, but carries you inward. Through chant, tone, or mantra, vibration becomes a guide, one that leads your awareness to settle, to concentrate, to dissolve into stillness so profound it doesn't need silence to be quiet. The teachings of the Buddha speak of noble silence, not as just the absence of speaking, but as a state of full presence where the noise of self fades, where the inner dialogue stops looping, where the need to narrate disappears. But for most minds, that kind of silence is not easy to access directly. It's like trying to walk into still water while running. Sound becomes the bridge, a way to meet the mind where it is and walk it toward the space where it can rest. Mantra is one form of that bridge. A simple phrase or sound, repeated not with tension but with rhythm, begins to slow the mind's movement. It doesn't try to overpower thought, it simply offers a steadier pattern. As the mantra repeats, thoughts begin to soften, the nervous system shifts, focus deepens, the body relaxes. It becomes easier to stay with the moment because the sound becomes the anchor. And it's not about the meaning of the words, it's about their resonance, their tone, their cadence. Ancient languages like Pali or Sanskrit were designed not just for speaking, but for vibrating through the body. Each syllable carries subtle impact, not mental, but energetic. The sound enters through the ears, but settles deeper. It touches places the intellect cannot reach. Chanting functions in a similar way, not as performance, but as practice. When done slowly, with full presence, it becomes a doorway to stillness. Your own voice becomes the tool that carries you into deeper awareness. Each note becomes a breath. Each phrase becomes a step toward quiet. This is why sacred sound is used not to fill space, but to clear it, to strip away the layers of mental noise, to replace chaos with rhythm, restlessness with repetition. It's not about volume or melody, it's about connection. When you chant or listen with full attention, you are not trying to get somewhere. You are being exactly where you are, completely. The paradox is that sound, when used with intention, doesn't disturb silence. It reveals it. Because silence is not the absence of vibration, it's the space that allows vibration to exist. It's the vastness behind the sound, the awareness that hears it without attachment. Tonal chanting deepens this process. Certain tones resonate not just with the ears, but with the body itself. The chest vibrates, the throat opens, the belly grounds. These are not abstract ideas. These are lived sensations, felt directly. As the sound hums through you, it brings your awareness out of thought and into the body, out of narrative and into now. You may begin with the sound, but eventually the sound becomes background. The vibration lingers. The repetition fades. And what remains is presence. Silence, not as emptiness, but as fullness without form. Sacred sound also teaches you to listen differently, not just to external sound, but to the subtle tones within you. The hum of your own breath, the faint ring of awareness, the rhythm of your heartbeat. These are not distractions, they are invitations. When you listen deeply, even your body becomes part of the practice. The deeper you listen, the less you need to add. You begin to see that silence is not a lack of sound, it is the absence of resistance. It is the space where sound and stillness merge, where you are not trying to control the experience, only meet it. This meeting is what dissolves separation between sound and silence, between self and awareness, between effort and ease. The mantra may fade, the chant may end, but the resonance remains inside you, around you, through you. Some traditions use a single syllable like Om or Aham or So-hum. These are not decorations. They are keys. They vibrate in alignment with breath, and when repeated slowly, they entrain the mind. Thought loses its grip. The need to fix, to chase, to grasp begins to release. The voice becomes less about identity and more about rhythm, and eventually even that rhythm quiets. You are left not in absence, but in presence so complete it needs no words. This is noble silence, not blankness, not withdrawal, but awareness without commentary. You begin to feel that silence itself is a sound, the soft hum beneath everything, the vibration of being, and you no longer need to reach for it. It is always here. Sacred sound just reminded you how to hear it, and even when life gets loud again, you carry that stillness. You remember how to return. A single breath, a simple tone, a quiet chant whispered inward. And there it is again, the silence, not forced, just revealed. Because the deepest silence was never the absence of sound. It was the quieting of self. And in that quiet, everything is clear. Everything is enough. Everything belongs. When the sound fades, but the clarity remains, something profound is revealed. You begin to notice the space that held it all, the silence that was never truly empty, only quiet enough to let you see. And as your mind grows still, your awareness no longer clings to labels, explanations, or thoughts. The inner need to name, to narrate, to wrap everything in language begins to loosen. What rises next is not a thought, it is presence. Soft, steady, undivided, and it brings you face to face with a kind of knowing that cannot be spoken. This is where wordlessness begins, not as a lack of expression, but as the release of inner commentary, the dropping of mental scripts, the choice to experience without dividing everything into concepts. This is the practice of bare attention, sati in its truest form. It is a way of being with what is, without adding, without removing, without turning it into anything else. In daily life, the mind constantly names what it encounters. It splits the world into categories: good, bad, right, wrong, mine, not mine. It wraps experience in language and belief. This constant stream of labeling is called papanka, mental proliferation. It multiplies thought unnecessarily, creates tension where there is none, and turns what is simple into what feels overwhelming. When you practice wordlessness, you are not trying to stop thought. You are learning to see before thought, to be with experience as it unfolds, without leaning forward or pulling away. You meet the breath, not as my breath, but simply as movement. You meet sensation not as pain or pleasure, but as changing energy. You witness sounds, emotions, and thoughts themselves, not as problems, but as ripples in the field of awareness. This kind of awareness does not grasp. It does not judge. It does not compare. It rests in what is, with full presence and no need to explain. It may sound subtle, but its effect is powerful, because the root of stress is often not the experience itself, but the story you tell about it. The commentary, the argument, the internal resistance. When you set aside the need to narrate, tension begins to dissolve. What remains is contact, direct, vivid, and real. This is not spacing out. It is the opposite. It is being so present that you don't have time to label. You feel before thought moves in. You return to a kind of innocence, the same awareness you had before you knew how to name a tree or a sky. Not because names are wrong, but because they filter reality, and sometimes reality simply needs to be seen. The practice begins with stillness. Not forced stillness, but a quiet willingness to stop chasing. You sit, you breathe, and you observe. When a thought arises, you notice it, not with judgment, but with clarity. You don't follow it, you don't push it away. You let it come and go like a cloud moving across the sky, and then you return, again and again, not to an idea, not to a belief, but to awareness itself. This awareness has no name. It is not you in the personal sense. It is not your personality or your history. It is what sees, what hears, what knows. It cannot be described, only recognized. When you abide in this awareness, the inner noise begins to fade. The opinions lose their grip. The urgency quiets. You stop needing to shape experience into something you can explain. You stop needing every moment to make sense. And in doing so, you begin to touch peace. Not the peace of everything being perfect, but the peace of not needing it to be. This is where freedom begins, because most suffering is born from the mind's attempt to fix, define, and control what it cannot. The more you try to manage life through thought, the more entangled you become. But when you see that you are not your thoughts, that you are the awareness behind them, you begin to rest in a place that thought cannot disturb. That place is wordless, not because it is empty, but because it is whole. You begin to trust experience as it is. You no longer need to explain sadness to know that it's there. You no longer need to justify joy to allow it. You meet each moment as it arrives, and you let it pass when it's ready. This trust deepens through practice, not a practice of doing more, but of doing less, of letting the world be what it is, of letting yourself be what you are, without the constant filter of internal language. And this doesn't mean abandoning thought. Thought has its place. Language has beauty. But you begin to choose when to use it. You stop living through it. You stop believing every sentence the mind constructs. You start seeing the gaps between the words, and those gaps are sacred. In those spaces, clarity is sharper. Compassion is easier. Presence is fuller. You feel the world not through the veil of ideas, but through direct contact. The breath as breath, the sound as sound, the body as sensation, the mind as movement. You witness all of it, and yet you cling to none of it. This is what it means to abide in pure awareness. It is a resting, not a running. It is a stillness that includes everything, even change. It is a space that holds the mind's chatter, but is never disturbed by it. And in that space, you begin to feel deeply what it means to be free. Free from mental storylines, free from the compulsion to define, free from the constant inner conversation about who you are, what you want, what you need to become. You begin to see that none of that was ever real. It was only language, useful sometimes, but not the whole truth. The whole truth cannot be said. It can only be seen, felt, known in silence. And when you live from that knowing, you stop reaching, you stop defending, you stop grasping for the next identity or idea to hold. You simply rest, as the sky rests behind every storm, as the ocean holds every wave without resistance. There is no need to add to the moment, no need to fix what arises, no need to decorate what's already complete. You are already here. You are already aware, and awareness, in its purest form, needs no words to be true. When the inner dialogue fades and you begin to rest in wordless awareness, you don't lose yourself, you find something more original. A clarity not built on belief or labels, a softness untouched by striving. This quiet presence isn't new, It isn't created by effort. It was always there, underneath the mental constructions, behind the roles and routines. You weren't building something, you were remembering. Beneath all the noise, there is a mind that hasn't been shaped by fear, a mind that knows how to rest without reason. That original, untouched awareness. This is your Buddha nature. It is not something you develop. It is what remains when you drop what was added. It is not perfect in the way the world defines perfection. It is not free of emotion or change, but it is unconditioned, unforced, and it cannot be broken. This is not philosophy. It is a truth that becomes obvious when all effort stops. The mind you usually identify with is trained. It repeats thoughts, mimics ideas, imitates what it has heard. It reacts before it observes. It searches without knowing what it truly wants. This conditioning was not your fault. It came from repetition, from survival, from learning how to fit into a world that prefers roles over rawness. Over time, you forgot what you were before the rules were taught. Returning to Buddha nature is not mystical, it is natural. But nature too has been covered, civilized, tamed, shaped into predictable patterns. And just like forests cleared to make room for cities, the inner mind was cleared to make room for ideas, for goals, for identity. The rewilding begins when you stop clearing space and start allowing it to grow again. This is not regression. It is not about losing language, logic, or structure. It is about remembering the original clarity that exists underneath structure. It is about recognizing that awareness did not begin when you learned to speak. It began long before that, in the simple act of being aware, of hearing before interpreting, of seeing without naming, of breathing without measurement. This return does not require effort. It requires trust. Trust in the possibility that stillness is intelligent, that silence is not emptiness, that there is something inside you that never needed to be built, only revealed. You are not returning to a blank slate. You are returning to the unfiltered ground of being. The conditioned mind will resist this. It will say, "That can't be enough." It will reach for concepts. It will try to evaluate even stillness. But the rewilded mind does not analyze. It listens. It feels. It responds from presence, not from rehearsed thought. It does not resist what is natural. It lets experience rise and fall without needing to fix or own it. This is not a fantasy. It is something felt directly in moments of full presence. When you are completely with what you are doing, without thought of outcome. When time feels irrelevant. When the self is not the center of attention. These are glimpses of the rewilded state, but they do not need to be rare. They can become the ground you live from. The reason this feels foreign is because of habit. Conditioning created loops in the nervous system, patterns of reaction that feel like personality, but they are not fixed. They are stories held in place by repetition and belief. When awareness becomes strong, these patterns soften, and what emerges is not a better version of you, but a freer one. One not defined by reaction, one not obsessed with self-image. Returning to Buddha nature is not about behaving perfectly. It is about acting from clarity. It is not about suppressing anything. It is about allowing everything without attachment. From this place, Kindness arises naturally. Patience becomes effortless. Compassion does not require effort because there is no other to compare yourself against. This awareness is like wild ground. It does not conform, but it holds everything. It does not divide the world into right and wrong, but sees clearly. It does not speak much, but when it does, the words carry weight, not because they are clever, but because they are rooted in silence. This kind of mind is not concerned with reputation. It does not fear not knowing. It lives close to the breath, to the earth, to the present. It does not need to explain itself. It knows its worth without needing confirmation. The world may not recognize this kind of presence. It may call it strange, unproductive, even lazy. But what the world calls laziness is often deep rest. What the world calls unproductive may be true clarity, and what the world calls naive may be real wisdom, wisdom untouched by cynicism. The rewilded mind does not need to win. It is not trying to succeed in anyone else's game. It lives by different rhythms. It moves with seasons, not with clocks. It trusts timing instead of forcing outcomes. To return to this mind, start small. Spend time in spaces without screens. Listen to sounds without identifying them. Feel your breath without needing to control it. Let your thoughts pass without turning them into beliefs. Let your body move without rehearsing how it looks. This is how you return, by allowing space for what has always known how to be. Over time, the conditioned reactions lose power. You stop needing to defend everything. You stop trying to correct everyone's opinion. You begin to care less about being understood and more about being real. Your words slow. Your choices simplify. Your peace deepens. This kind of return is not an event. It is a rhythm, a daily remembering, not forced, not scheduled, not achieved. It is a loosening, a softening, a homecoming. And as you continue to return, you notice you need less approval, less control, less complexity. What once felt essential now feels heavy, and what once seemed ordinary, like breath, stillness, sky, feels sacred again. You don't need to fight your conditioning. You only need to stop feeding it. Stop rehearsing the old scripts. Stop believing every reaction is a truth. Stop performing a version of yourself that feels distant. Allow wildness, allow presence, allow stillness to guide you back to what never left. This is not spiritual performance. This is your original nature. It was never broken. It does not need improvement, only space, only trust, only silence deep enough to be heard again. As you begin to remember the depth of your own untouched presence, something else starts to move quietly in the background, a readiness to let go of even more. The clinging that once felt necessary no longer serves the same function. The effort to control, to grasp, to accumulate, mentally, emotionally, physically, starts to feel heavy. It no longer aligns with the clarity you've begun to touch. And now you're faced with the subtle question, what would it mean to let go, not just of the story or the thought, but of the need to hold anything at all? Renunciation begins not with denial, but with insight. It arises not from rejection of the world, but from seeing its nature clearly. It doesn't come from force. It comes from understanding the weight of clinging and realizing you don't need to carry it. When you release what burdens the heart, What's left isn't emptiness, it's freedom. And that freedom is found breath by breath. Renunciation is not dramatic. It happens slowly, through repetition, through gentleness, through awareness. And one of the simplest, most direct ways to enter it is through the breath, specifically through the exhale. In every breath out, there is a release. The body lets go, the lungs surrender, the muscles soften, and with it, the grasping loosens. The breath can become a teacher of letting go, not just of air, but of resistance, tension, identity. Every exhale can be an offering, a moment of trust, a decision to stop holding what was never yours to begin with. This is where Asubha Bhavana comes in, the contemplation of what is not beautiful. This practice is not about negativity or rejection. It is about clarity. It is a way of training the mind to see without glamour, to unhook from the attachments that come from illusion, to stop chasing what cannot satisfy. When you contemplate the body, not as something to be desired, but as something impermanent, fragile, constantly changing, you begin to see how much of your clinging was based on misunderstanding. This isn't about shame, it's about realism. It's about seeing things as they are, not better or worse, just clearer. The body ages, sensations pass, pleasures fade. And when this is understood deeply, the grasping begins to fall away naturally. You no longer chase what you know cannot last. You no longer depend on what shifts for your sense of peace. Breathing with this awareness becomes a sacred act. Each inhale brings you into presence. Each exhale carries away what's no longer needed. You do not have to force renunciation. You breathe it. You trust that what releases with the breath was meant to leave, that you are not made smaller by letting go, but lighter. And this breath-based renunciation is not limited to material things. It applies to ideas, expectations, attachments to identity. You can breathe out the need to be right, the pressure to be liked, the fear of being misunderstood. Each one is a weight, and the breath knows how to set them down. You begin to live differently when renunciation becomes embodied. You speak less from defense. You act less from impulse. You move with more space around every decision. Not because you've given up, but because you've seen what matters. You've seen what lasts. And it's not the thing you clung to. It's the clarity that came when you stopped. Renunciation also brings gentleness, not because it softens truth, but because it removes urgency. You no longer have to get what you want to be at peace. You no longer panic at delay or loss. You start to notice that joy lives not in acquiring, but in releasing, not in controlling outcomes, but in meeting what is. Asubha Bhavana teaches you to stop seeing only the polished surface. It invites you to look deeper, not with judgment, but with honesty. When you reflect on the body as a process rather than an object, you stop being seduced by temporary satisfaction. You see the unfolding, the aging, the fragility. You stop expecting it to bring permanent happiness. This doesn't create coldness. It creates compassion. You recognize that everyone is walking around in a changing, vulnerable form, that no one escapes decay, that no beauty is permanent. And from that insight, you begin to feel less alone. You no longer feel the need to compete, compare, or possess. You see your sameness with others, not your difference. Breathing with this insight shifts everything. The breath becomes not just a tool, but a ritual. a practice of returning again and again to what's real. You begin to notice where the clinging hides, in a sentence, a tone of voice, a sudden reaction, and you breathe. You don't analyze, you don't suppress, you just let it leave with the exhale. This kind of renunciation does not require you to give up your life. It requires you to stop being ruled by it. You can still love, still work, still care, but without being bound, without believing that your worth depends on the outcome. You begin to participate more fully because you're no longer afraid of letting go. The breath teaches impermanence in every cycle. What comes in must go out. What arises will pass. Every moment appears and disappears, and the more you breathe with this awareness, the less you resist. The more you see that everything that clings creates suffering, and everything that releases brings space. You may notice that some attachments feel more stubborn. The identity you built, the story you've told for years, the idea that your value is linked to a title, a role, a possession. These are not easily dropped, but even here, the breath helps. You meet the attachment, you see it clearly, you name it silently, and you breathe it out, not to destroy it, but to stop being owned by it. Over time, the inner space grows. Not a hollow emptiness, but a deep stillness. The kind of space where peace lives not as a reward, but as your natural state. Not because everything is perfect, but because you've stopped expecting perfection. Renunciation leads to clarity. It makes room for presence. When you're not filled with craving, you can see, you can respond. You can feel joy without needing it to last. You can feel pain without needing it to mean something is wrong. You are no longer pulled by every desire, no longer pushed by every fear. You begin to live in the center of your own being, not clinging, not resisting. And in that center, the breath continues. In, out, rise, fall, holding nothing, releasing everything. You don't need to force detachment. You just stop feeding attachment. You stop rehearsing what hurts. You stop insisting that things stay the same. You stop chasing the feeling you lost or the outcome you want. You meet what is here. You breathe with it. You let it pass, and you trust that what remains is enough. This is the breath of renunciation. Not cold, not empty, but deeply alive. It is not escape. It is arrival. Not into something better, but into something real. You no longer hold your life. You let it move through you. You no longer carry the weight. You let it rest. This is not abandonment. This is care. Breathing, releasing, returning, again and again, until what remains is light, simple, unbound, enough. When the breath teaches you to release, not just with the lungs but with the heart, something else becomes visible. The space grows quieter, lighter. You begin to feel how much of your inner tension came from protecting something you couldn't name, a sense of self you've been trying to preserve, a version of you crafted over time by habit, by memory, by praise and pain. And suddenly you see it. The fear of letting go wasn't about what you had. It was about who you believed you were without it. Now, the invitation becomes even deeper. Not just to release your grip on things, emotions, or roles, but to release the belief in a fixed self altogether. This is the heart of the teaching on anatta, non-self. It doesn't mean you don't exist. It doesn't mean you are nothing. It means the you you've been clinging to isn't as solid as it seems. What you call your identity is more like a pattern, more like a reflection. It changes depending on where you are, who you're with, what mood you're in, sometimes strong, sometimes unsure, sometimes kind, sometimes closed. And still, you try to build something stable out of it, something permanent, something that won't change, but it always does. The thoughts shift, the preferences shift, even your memories shift. What remains constant isn't the content, it's the awareness behind it. The quiet observer that notices each passing moment but doesn't cling to any of them as final. When you begin to rest in this knowing, a profound peace begins to emerge. Not because everything makes sense, but because you've stopped needing a permanent identity to feel safe. The power of insignificance lies here, not in becoming smaller, but in realizing you don't have to hold everything together. You don't have to define yourself endlessly. You don't have to protect a fragile image. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to not know who you are. You are allowed to stop performing certainty. This insight doesn't lead to apathy, it leads to freedom. When you stop identifying with every emotion, you feel them more clearly. When you stop attaching to every thought, you see them more honestly. When you stop clinging to a version of yourself, you move through life with more softness, more flexibility. You begin to experience life not as a self-centered project, but as a flowing process. Everything you think of as me is arising and passing, just like sensations, just like sound. There's no fixed point to defend, no solid core to protect. And that's not loss, that's relief. The illusion of a solid self is heavy. It's what makes you take everything personally, every word, every mistake, every look. You filter the world through a narrow identity and then feel crushed when something threatens it. But when you realize that the self is not fixed, everything softens. You no longer feel the need to be perfect. You no longer panic when you're misunderstood. You no longer suffer when someone doesn't see you the way you hoped. You understand that everyone is projecting, including you. Everyone is seeing through their own lens, and no single version of you is the whole truth, even the one in your own mind. This is not an excuse to avoid responsibility. On the contrary, when you stop trying to protect a false self, you become more accountable. You don't have to defend, you can respond. You can admit when you're wrong. You can change without shame, because you are not trapped in a fixed identity. Anatta does not mean absence of care. It means you care without ownership. You experience fully without clinging. You show up with your whole heart, knowing it doesn't need to be held in place by a permanent name. This is a different kind of strength. Not the kind built on self-importance, but the kind born from letting go of self-concern. You start to feel the quiet joy of being small, of not needing to stand out, of not having to prove anything. You begin to rest in your own being, not because it's unique, but because it's shared. You are not separate from others, not fundamentally. What divides us is often just the stories we protect. Without those stories, something opens. A kindness not bound by identity, a love that's not transactional, a presence that's not trying to be impressive. This is not erasure, it's return. Return to what's true before the labels, before the achievements, before the fears. Not emptiness in a hollow sense, emptiness in the way a clear sky is empty, vast, silent, holding everything. You see this even in the breath. It moves without needing to be named. It doesn't ask for identity. It comes, it goes, and still you are here. Awareness doesn't depend on self. It simply knows. And that knowing is where your peace lives, not in who you think you are, but in the spaciousness of not needing to be anyone at all. This is not an idea to understand with the mind. It is something you begin to sense the more you let go, the more you pause when the urge to define arises, the more you notice how temporary everything truly is. Even this, even now. And in that recognition, you don't collapse. You rise, not as a stronger self, but as freedom itself. The wind without edges, the sea without a name. The presence that sees everything, needs nothing, and simply flows. You rest in being, and being needs no defense. When the weight of the self begins to dissolve, what remains is presence without the need to protect or perform. But even this clarity is not static. The mind continues to move, to ripple, to stir. Not because something is wrong, but because the nature of mind is motion. Stillness is not the absence of activity. It is awareness that no longer gets pulled in every direction. And to meet the mind as it is, without running from it or getting lost inside it, you need a skill that brings you closer without grasping. That skill is mindfulness, not as a trend or technique, but as direct, unfiltered attention. A mirror held up to the present state of your inner world. The mind changes moment to moment, sometimes calm, sometimes agitated, sometimes distracted, dull, restless, heated, heavy, light, contracted, scattered. These shifts are subtle, often unnoticed, but they shape your choices, your words, your tone, your breath. And most suffering arises not from these shifts, but from being unaware of them as they happen. Mindfulness invites you to check the temperature of your mind, not to fix it immediately, but to recognize it. Just like a fever alerts you to imbalance in the body, agitation in the mind points to something that needs attention, not judgment, not suppression, just simple, honest awareness. This awareness is vipassana, not just concentration, but insight. The ability to observe clearly what is happening as it happens without becoming it. You begin by sitting, breathing, not to relax, but to see. You close the eyes not to shut out the world, but to tune into what the inner world is doing. And you watch, not in search of perfection, just in search of truth. The thoughts come. You notice. The emotion stirs. You feel. The restlessness builds. You observe. The boredom whispers. You stay. This staying is what softens the storm. Not control, not force, presence. You learn to track the heat of the mind. When it is burning with urgency, driven by craving, caught in loops, you sense the tension in the jaw, the breath, the chest, and instead of tightening around it, you breathe with it, you open to it, and the heat, no longer fueled by resistance, begins to cool. You also notice dullness when the mind fogs, grows heavy, unfocused. This too is a temperature. Not wrong, just worth noticing. You don't fight it. You bring light to it, gentle interest. You ask, where is the breath now? What sensation is present? You return again and again, not with effort, but with curiosity. Some moments, the mind will feel like a swarm, thoughts buzzing in every direction. Vipassana doesn't chase them. It steps back. It recognizes the movement without stepping into it. It sees the mind as a stream, not as the self. And in seeing, something changes. Not the content of thought, but your relationship to it. You are no longer inside the chaos. You are the one watching it pass. This doesn't stop the movement, but it removes the suffering born from identification. You don't need to calm the mind to be mindful. You need only to know its state, to see agitation when it's there, to see peace when it arises, to see distraction when it pulls, and to meet each one with the same quality, open awareness. This is what it means to take the temperature, not just once, but continuously, like tending a fire, noticing when it grows too hot, when it's fading, when it needs air, when it needs space. Mindfulness brings balance, not by force, but by attention. When the mind is burning, you bring coolness through presence. When it is dull, you bring sharpness through inquiry. When it is restless, you bring steadiness through stillness. Each mind state has its own texture. You learn to recognize them, like learning the weather, not because you fear the storm, but because you no longer want to walk through it unaware. Over time, the habit of watching grows stronger than the habit of reacting. You catch the moment before the anger takes over. You feel the pull before the craving drives you. You sense the collapse before the story takes hold. This is wisdom in real time, not theoretical, not distant, but alive in the body, in the breath, in the heart. You move from being trapped by the mind to being in relationship with it. And from that relationship, compassion grows. You no longer judge the restless mind. You care for it. You no longer resent the tension. You breathe with it. You stop trying to be someone different. You start being more honestly with what's here. The mind's heat and coolness, its clarity and confusion, all become teachers. Each state, a signal, each moment, an opportunity to return. You learn that mindfulness is not a break from life. It is the deepest way of living it. This awareness doesn't fix everything, but it changes everything. Because the moment you see clearly, you're no longer caught blindly. The moment you notice, you're free to choose. You begin to ask more meaningful questions. What is the mind doing now? Where is my attention? What story is driving this feeling? What happens if I pause just for a breath? And in that pause, truth becomes visible. Not as a concept, but as felt experience. The temperature begins to settle. Not because the world changes, but because your relationship to experience transforms. You are no longer running from mind states or clinging to them. You are meeting them with openness, with interest, with care. And this is how stillness arises, not from controlling the mind, but from being present with it fully. Not from forcing quiet, but from no longer feeding the noise. Stillness is not the absence of thought. It is the absence of entanglement. Mindfulness leads you there gently, not by suppressing, but by seeing, not by escaping, but by embracing. And in this embrace, the mind becomes a companion, not a problem. You stop needing it to be any particular way. You simply listen, and in the listening you return, again and again, back to presence, back to balance, back to peace. As your awareness grows steadier and the pull of reactivity loses its grip, something else begins to rise to the surface, quieter than thought, older than words, a tension that mindfulness alone does not dissolve, a heaviness that sits beneath emotion. It is the residue of what was never released, the long-held burdens of blame, the lingering sharpness of betrayal, the quiet ache of unresolved hurt. This is where the practice turns inward, not for control, but for compassion. Forgiveness is not an event. It is a process of softening, of remembering how heavy it is to carry what no longer serves. And this release is not for others. It is for your own freedom. Because pain repeated through memory continues to wound even long after the moment has passed. To forgive does not mean to forget or approve. It means to stop burning yourself with what someone else left behind. It means to stop protecting old injuries by keeping them alive. It means to recognize that resentment is not strength, it is an anchor. Forgiveness begins not with others, but with the willingness to let go of the identity that suffering shaped. The part of you that was wronged, humiliated, abandoned, dismissed, it is real. It deserves tenderness, but it does not need to define the rest of your life. Karuna, or compassion, is not sentiment. It is fierce clarity. It sees the pain and chooses not to amplify it. It sees the story and chooses not to feed it. It turns toward the wound not to fix, but to offer presence. The pain wants to be seen, not protected, not repeated. Metta, or loving kindness, becomes the balm. It is not earned, it is offered. You do not give it because someone deserves it. You give it because your heart knows the cost of withholding it. When you hold bitterness, it is your peace that contracts. When you hold love, it is your breath that deepens. Before sleep, this becomes a sacred opportunity to sit quietly and reflect on where the mind still grips, to ask, who am I still blaming? What memory still stings? What thought keeps reopening a wound that wants to close? You do not need to rush to forgive. You only need to notice where you're still hurting, where you flinch when a name appears in your mind, where you tighten when the past knocks again. And then you begin the practice. Breathing slowly, you bring to mind that person, that moment, that self, not to relive, but to re-meet. You say silently, I see you. I see the pain. I see the fear beneath the words. You say, I release the need to hold this any longer. You do this again and again, not to pretend, but to free yourself. Because the moment you let go of revenge, of anger, of the imagined correction of the past, you reclaim energy that was frozen. Forgiveness is not weak. It is strong enough to not need anything in return. Not apology, not agreement, not justice in the form the ego craves. It is the strength to walk away from the fire you keep lighting for someone else and finally stop breathing in the smoke. Sometimes the one who needs forgiveness most is the self. The decisions you regret, the times you stayed too long, the words you spoke in anger, the trust you broke, your own or someone else's. These live in the corners of the heart like unfinished conversations. So you turn toward yourself and you say, I see that you didn't know better. I see that you were afraid. I see that you've suffered enough. And you offer kindness, not to forget, but to remember differently, to see that growth was born through pain and peace is born through release. Forgiveness does not change the past. It transforms the way the past lives in you. It allows grief to move instead of stay stuck. It lets love in where only silence remained. It reopens the heart that closed in defense and reminds it that safety does not mean separation. Before sleep, this practice becomes even more powerful because the heart is quieter, the body is softer, the defenses are low, and the mind is still enough to hear the deeper truth. You do not need to carry this into tomorrow. You breathe in softness. You breathe out release. You whisper the names of those you no longer wish to fight. You remember that their suffering is not separate from yours. You remember that confusion creates harm, that fear distorts love, that pain can be passed like a torch or extinguished through compassion. And when you don't know how to forgive, you can start with willingness. You can say, I'm willing to let this go. I'm willing to stop reliving it. I'm willing to find peace, even if I don't know how yet. Willingness is the doorway. Practice walks you through it. There are nights when the weight will feel too heavy, when the anger seems justified, when your story feels carved into your bones. On those nights, you don't need to force it. You only need to breathe, to feel, to not turn away. Forgiveness doesn't always feel graceful. Sometimes it begins in silence, in breath, in the absence of another retelling. Forgiveness is not a transaction. It is an act of presence. You stop waiting for the other person to change. You stop hoping the past will fix itself. You choose peace over pride. You choose rest over rightness. You choose healing over the illusion of control. And with each choice, something shifts. Not loudly, not quickly, but deeply. You begin to feel space where there was tightness. You begin to notice that the story no longer stings. You begin to trust that love is not erased by pain, only hidden by it. Karuna gives you the eyes to see the humanity in others. Metta gives you the heart to hold that vision steady. Together, they form the foundation of release. As you lie down, you can offer this final reflection. May I forgive. May I be forgiven. May we all know peace. These are not just wishes. They are directions. They are acts of devotion. They are reminders that every heart aches, every person struggles, and no one escapes the confusion of this world. You don't forgive because it's easy. You forgive because not forgiving is harder, because carrying pain for years becomes a weight you were never meant to bear, because life is too short to rehearse harm, too sacred to store bitterness. Forgiveness is not a destination, it is a returning to softness, to breath, to freedom. You rest in the heart's quiet knowing. The release was never for them, it was always for you, and now you are free to sleep, to let your mind settle, to let your heart exhale, to let the night hold what no longer belongs in your hands. Peace comes when you stop holding on. And now it's time to let go. After forgiveness softens the weight of what you once carried, the heart becomes a quieter place. You no longer feel the need to replay old wounds, and you stop searching for new ones to protect yourself from. But with this stillness comes a new kind of clarity, the ability to notice how often your emotional world swings without warning. Joy turns quickly into fear. Contentment collapses into craving. One comment lifts your mood, another crushes it. And even without loud drama, there is a kind of chaos in this swinging, a hidden exhaustion from always feeling too much or too little. This is where the next unfolding begins. There is a path between excess and absence, between reaction and repression, a way to feel without flooding, a way to witness without freezing. The Buddha called it the middle way, Majjhima Patipada. And in the emotional landscape, this becomes emotional minimalism, not in the sense of feeling less, but in feeling with balance. It is not about becoming indifferent. It is about developing enough inner steadiness to stop being pulled into every emotional high or low. It is the practice of seeing emotion clearly, meeting it gently, and letting it pass without creating identity around it. Emotions are natural. They arise based on conditions. They move like waves. But the mind, when untrained, builds stories on top of them. It tries to make them permanent, significant, personal. A feeling of sadness becomes a belief that something is wrong. A moment of anger becomes a reason to lash out. A flicker of desire turns into clinging. Emotional minimalism cuts through this layering. It does not push feelings away. It meets them without multiplying them. This is a different kind of discipline. It asks you to pause before naming your state, to feel before reacting, to sense where in the body the emotion is showing itself, to breathe into it without assuming what it means, to let it exist without either indulging it or pushing it away. The practice begins by noticing how quickly the mind adds meaning. Something happens. You feel a reaction, and within seconds, a story forms. They always treat me this way. This shouldn't be happening. I can't handle this. Emotional minimalism interrupts this sequence. It allows you to feel the sensation without turning it into a personal crisis. You begin to see that the emotion is not the problem. It's the extra story, the clinging, the judgment that creates the suffering. When you strip that away, the raw emotion is often simple. A tightness in the chest, a warmth in the belly, a rush of energy through the limbs, temporary, movable, human. This is not spiritual bypassing. It is full contact without drama. You allow what arises. You breathe with it. You let it move. And then you let it go. Without grabbing it, without defining yourself by it, without needing it to last or disappear too soon. This way of living doesn't require constant watching. It becomes intuitive. You sense when an emotion is beginning to take over. You feel the tension of identification, and you return to breath, to body, to present moment awareness. You stop feeding the emotional fire with more thoughts. And when you don't indulge or suppress, you begin to see the emotion for what it is. Information. A signal. A messenger, not a master. Anger shows up to point to a boundary. Fear arrives to alert you to uncertainty. Joy blossoms when something aligns with your values. Sadness reflects loss. But none of these feelings need to own you. They visit. You listen. You respond. You release. The middle way is the ability to walk through that process without needing extremes, without swinging from one side to the other, without craving constant positivity or bracing for constant harm. You move through experience with steadiness, not numbness. You learn to live on stable ground, not shifting moods. This kind of stability is not cold. It allows you to feel fully, but it prevents collapse. You no longer get trapped in emotional spirals. You no longer make decisions in the middle of storms. You give yourself space. You stop reacting as a habit and begin responding with wisdom. It also teaches you how to hold the emotions of others without drowning in them. You listen more clearly. You stop trying to fix. You stop taking everything personally. You hold space with presence and boundaries, compassion without absorption. Over time, emotional minimalism becomes a way of being. You carry less internal clutter. You stop rehearsing arguments that never happened. You stop inventing futures built from old pain. You stop picking at wounds just to feel something. You start to value inner quiet more than stimulation. This doesn't mean avoiding joy. It means not chasing it desperately. It means letting joy arise naturally and fall away naturally. You begin to trust that your worth isn't tied to how intensely you feel, but to how clearly you live. The mind stops swinging like a pendulum and begins to settle. The nervous system learns that not every emotion is an emergency. You stop fearing sadness. You stop clinging to excitement. You learn that contentment is enough. The middle way gives you that gift, a life not built on constant craving or constant aversion, but on balance, on clarity, on simplicity. This is not always easy. It takes practice. You may still get caught, you may still react, but you recover faster. You learn to notice sooner. You stop judging yourself for feeling and start appreciating the space between the feelings. That space becomes your home. The pause becomes your strength. Emotional minimalism also creates space for joy that isn't loud. A quiet kind of happiness. Not from things going perfectly, but from being present enough to notice what is already here. A bird singing, a breath softening, a moment of rest. These small things become rich when you stop needing drama to feel alive. This practice also reveals the subtle ways you seek discomfort, out of habit, out of identity, out of resistance to peace. You notice when you pick fights with your own thoughts, when you stir tension because stillness feels unfamiliar, and you begin to choose differently. You choose the simple response, the quiet understanding, the action that requires less force. You learn to rest emotionally without disconnecting, to feel fully without flooding. And in that rest, you begin to heal, not through effort, but through balance, not through extremes, but through presence. This is the middle way in the emotional life, and it becomes your foundation, not because you have removed emotion from your experience, but because you've stopped being consumed by it. You feel, you see, you stay steady, and you continue on, peacefully, present, free. When emotional reactivity no longer rules your inner space, and you begin to live from steadiness rather than extremes, you naturally find yourself drawn toward subtler experiences. The quiet between emotions, the softness beneath effort. The body speaks in ways the thinking mind often misses, and some of its messages are so familiar, so ordinary, they're dismissed entirely. But awareness doesn't overlook what is simple. It begins to notice what has always been happening just beneath the tension. And in this stillness, you begin to sense the significance of one of the most overlooked expressions of the body. Yawning. Not as a sign of boredom, but as a threshold. Not as fatigue alone, but as a subtle opening into a state of deep surrender. Yawning often arrives without request. It doesn't wait for permission. It opens the mouth, stretches the breath, releases the tension. And it does all of this on its own, without strategy, without resistance. In a culture built on control, this simple act can feel intrusive, even embarrassing. But when met with awareness, yawning reveals something far more profound. It is a direct invitation into passaddhi, the tranquility that arises when the mind and body release effort. To yawn consciously is to allow the body to guide the mind. It is to witness an expression of surrender so natural, so primal, that it bypasses thought entirely. The breath deepens, the face opens, the muscles soften. You drop out of thinking without having to stop your thoughts. You fall into awareness without having to reach for it. Most people don't think of yawning as part of spiritual practice, but practice doesn't mean performance, it means presence. And yawning is a pure expression of presence reclaiming itself. It cannot be faked without losing its power. When it comes on its own, it is honest, raw, and total. If you begin to observe the yawn instead of brushing past it, something shifts. You notice how the breath expands beyond the habitual. You feel the ribs move in a fuller way. The face relaxes, the eyes water. There is no tension in the act, no clinging to identity, no need to prove. It is simply release. Passaddhi is the quality of tranquility that does not depend on control. It is not created by tightening. It is not the result of striving. It emerges when conditions allow. Yawning signals that the conditions for stillness are becoming favorable. The nervous system is beginning to downshift. The vigilance is fading. The grip is loosening. And when you allow it, really allow it, you step through an invisible door, into the parasympathetic rhythm, into presence that holds no agenda, into the simplicity of awareness that does not need to do anything but be. Yawning can be the body's way of saying, it's safe now, safe to let go, safe to soften, safe to rest. And not just rest in sleep, but in awareness. Because when effort falls away, the watcher becomes clearer, the space between doing becomes available. This practice is not about inducing yawns artificially. It's about recognizing them when they arise, feeling them fully, not stifling them, not rushing past, but pausing and entering them. Being with the whole experience, from the first stretch of the jaw to the quiet that follows. Each yawn becomes a mini-teacher, a moment that says, this is what surrender feels like. This is how tension leaves. This is what soft awareness looks like in the body. Over time, you may begin to see patterns. Yawning happens more when you're letting go of trying, when you stop solving, when you stop analyzing, when you drop the inner effort and just rest in being. It arrives in meditation, in slow breathing, after emotional release. It punctuates moments of returning. Yawning is not passive. It is active release. The nervous system doesn't need permission. It doesn't need instruction. It simply does what it knows to do when given space. And that's what makes this practice powerful. It's not something you add. It's something you stop resisting. When you meet yawning with mindfulness, you begin to appreciate the wisdom of the body. You see that awakening doesn't always come through stillness alone or intensity. Sometimes it arrives through the softest of gestures, the unconscious exhale, the uncontrollable stretch, the small moment where the body resets itself. And after the yawn passes, don't rush, don't immediately move, just feel what has shifted. Sense the stillness that remains. Notice the openness, the quiet. Let yourself rest in that pocket of peace before thought resumes. This is how awareness becomes effortless, not because you forced it to happen, but because you stopped getting in its way. The mind often believes that attention must be sharpened, that focus must be held tightly. But yawning reveals another path. It shows that alertness can be soft, that awareness can be wide, that presence can be open, slow, and completely natural. There is no tension in yawning, no contraction, no grasping. This teaches the mind how to follow the body's lead, how to open gently, how to release identity without trying to. And in that space, the practice deepens. You don't arrive at peace. You dissolve into it. You don't construct stillness. You fall into what was already there. Each yawn can remind you the door is already open. The body knows how to walk through it. When you live with this sensitivity, even the simplest signals take on meaning. You no longer need to wait for breakthrough moments. You begin to find teachings in the pauses, in the letting go, in the involuntary acts that remind you you are not just your thinking mind. The body is always practicing. The breath is always teaching. Awareness is always available. Yawning shows the moment when all of that lines up and becomes visible, without effort, without seeking, without struggle. And the more you trust it, the more you realize that effortlessness doesn't mean disengaged. It means flowing. It means in tune. It means aware without being tense, alive without being agitated. That is passaddhi, tranquility rooted not in withdrawal but in harmony. The yawn then becomes a sacred symbol, a reminder that stillness isn't far, that it's already moving through you, that your only task is to feel it, to stop interrupting what the body is trying to do, to listen instead of manage. So the next time a yawn comes, let it arrive fully. Let it stretch you open. Let it soften the edges. Let it draw you into the breath. And let what follows be honored as the start of something deeper, not a sign of tiredness, but a return to presence, and a step closer to the kind of awareness that holds everything without effort, without clinging, without interruption, just being, fully, now. When surrender begins to happen without force, when yawning gently opens the door to calm, the mind no longer fights the body's invitation to rest. In that soft openness, something deeper becomes possible, not just a passing moment of peace, but a steady return to presence. A presence that doesn't demand, doesn't rush, doesn't seek proof. One that feels like home, not because it is familiar, but because it is original. The body begins to remember what safety feels like. The mind starts to trust what it doesn't need to control. And that is where the next unfolding takes place, a return to the womb of the present moment. The womb is not a metaphor for escape or fantasy. It is a symbol of complete holding, of being enclosed in warmth, protected by stillness, supported by something greater than effort. This return is not backward. It is downward, into the body, into the breath, into the layer of awareness beneath thought. To come back to this space, the body must be given permission to feel safe. Not in the mind's idea of safety, but through direct physical experience. The nervous system doesn't respond to concepts. It responds to signals, touch, posture, breath, temperature, rhythm. When these become steady, the deeper systems begin to relax, not as reaction, but as truth. Begin with the posture. The body must feel stable. Whether lying down, sitting cross-legged, or reclined with support, there must be a sense that nothing is being held unnecessarily. The spine need not be forced straight, but allowed to lengthen naturally. The jaw softens, the shoulders rest. The hands find a place to land. Every joint becomes a point of surrender. This is not collapse. This is intentional grounding. Then comes the breath. Not manipulated, not performed, just noticed. The breath as it is, meeting the body where it is. And over time, as the body listens, the breath changes on its own. It deepens, not through effort, but through permission. Each inhale a quiet returning, each exhale a letting go. No pressure to breathe a certain way, only the invitation to feel what is already breathing. This is the beginning of embodied sati, mindfulness not as a mental exercise, but as full presence in form. Awareness that includes the sensations, the posture, the energy in the body, the contact with the ground, the pull of gravity, the quiet rhythm of the breath. Nothing is excluded, nothing is judged. As this mindfulness matures, it becomes samadhi, unification. The attention stops scattering. It gathers itself. It rests in the body as a stable base, not because the mind is forced to focus, but because distraction loses its pull. When the body feels safe and the breath is steady, the mind stops needing escape. The present becomes not just bearable, but nourishing. Returning to this place again and again creates a shift in how you relate to discomfort. You begin to feel it from the body, not about the body. You notice tightness without layering panic. You feel restlessness without turning it into failure, because you are not outside the moment looking in. You are inside it, held by it, part of it. The more you return, the more you realize that most suffering comes from leaving this place too soon, from trying to think your way through pain instead of breathing with it, from standing outside your own body instead of being inside it long enough to listen. Returning to the womb of now means you no longer chase what is already here. This return is subtle. It happens in layers. You sit, and maybe the first 10 minutes are restlessness. The mind wants to move, the body itches, the thoughts grow loud, but you stay, you breathe. And then something softens, not because you conquered the mind, but because you didn't leave. You stayed long enough for the defenses to lower. You begin to recognize the difference between thought-based attention and felt presence. Thought tries to name everything. Felt presence simply meets it. Thought searches for control. Felt presence accepts the shape of things. Thought makes plans. Presence experiences the moment fully before any plan is needed. This is the womb. Not a retreat, a return to wholeness, to clarity, to connection that doesn't rely on outer stability. The more you stay here, the less easily you are thrown off by surface change. You begin to feel the world moving around you without feeling moved by it. This is not detachment. It is deep involvement with reality without resistance. The body remains soft. The breath remains steady. The mind rests in awareness, not because it was forced, but because it found something more trustworthy than thought: presence. This presence doesn't fix everything. It doesn't erase hardship, but it gives you a place to return when everything outside begins to fracture. It becomes the constant in a life that cannot offer guarantees. And when you live from that center, everything changes, not because life becomes easier, but because you are no longer divided. You don't need to escape the moment. You don't need to improve it, to rest in it. You simply need to allow it to be as it is. And when you do, the body relaxes, the breath deepens, the mind slows, and you remember what it feels like to be whole without trying. This kind of return is not always easy. You will forget. You will resist. You will find yourself reaching for distractions again. But each time you notice, you have another chance to come back. And each return builds trust. The kind of trust that doesn't depend on results. The kind of trust that remembers where home is, even when lost. You start to live differently. You stop needing to prove your worth. You stop needing to be somewhere else. You stop needing every moment to be pleasant. You begin to value the simple feeling of being rooted, breathing with what is, resting in enough. And you realize that this womb, the present moment, is not far. It is never gone. It doesn't wait for silence or success or stillness outside. It waits for your willingness to stop, to notice, to return. You do not have to go back in time. You only have to go back into yourself, back into the breath, back into the body, back into now. And here, everything begins again, fresh, clear, whole, as you rest more deeply in the body's quiet wisdom, returning again and again to the safety of the present moment. You begin to notice a shift in rhythm. The mind is not pulling as much. The breath is softer. The nervous system feels less defensive, more open. From this space of grounded awareness, something subtle begins to stir. Not a thought, not an intention, but a vibration. An impulse not to speak, but to sound. Not to explain, but to hum. And in this simple act of vibration, the body opens another doorway, one that leads inward through resonance, not reasoning. Humming is often overlooked because it seems too simple, too ordinary. But it carries ancient intelligence. Both in physiology and in spiritual practice, it holds the power to connect the body and the mind, to regulate the nervous system, and to tune awareness toward stillness. At the center of this process is the vagus nerve, a long branching network that touches the heart, lungs, throat, diaphragm, digestive system. It is the communication line between brain and body, between thought and sensation. And when it is activated in gentle ways, the entire system begins to shift into calm. This isn't theory, it is felt directly. Humming is one of the most natural ways to stimulate this nerve, not through force, but through steady sound. When you hum with presence, the vibration passes through the vocal cords, down the throat, into the chest, into the belly. It tells the nervous system there is no danger here. It reminds the heart to slow, the breath to deepen, the muscles to release. The body listens to vibration more quickly than to thought. Words might not reach where sound can go. That is why mantra, especially when vocalized, has remained a part of spiritual practice for thousands of years. Not because of the language itself, but because of the frequency it carries. The mind may not understand every syllable, but the body feels its effect. When you hum a sacred sound like Om or Namo Amitabha, you are not performing a ritual. You are aligning your system. The tone guides your focus inward. It provides rhythm, resonance, and a soft container for attention. It also activates the parasympathetic response, the rest and digest mode, helping release accumulated tension and restoring internal harmony. This is not about volume, it's about quality. A soft, steady hum, a gentle repetition. Not dramatic, but consistent. You feel the sound more than hear it. You let it move through you rather than push it out. Over time, you begin to notice the difference between sound made from tension and sound made from surrender. Tension tightens the throat, flattens the tone, demands something. Surrender allows the sound to rise naturally, to flow through the breath, to vibrate the body from within. Mantra practice is not just mental repetition. It is a full-body presence. When paired with humming, it becomes an embodied meditation. The awareness does not chase thought, it rides the sound. The mind does not wander as easily. It has something to rest on, something living, moving, steady. You can begin simply, sitting comfortably, breathing slowly, letting the mouth stay soft, letting the breath become audible, then letting the sound arise, or hum, or a sacred syllable of your own practice. Let it linger, let it vibrate, let it fade naturally. Then breathe again, and repeat. Each cycle becomes a cleansing, a renewal, a descent out of the head and into the deeper body, the places where memory lives, where emotion is stored, where language does not reach. And if mantra doesn't feel natural, you can hum without words. A simple tone, a long exhale with sound. It still works. The vibration alone carries the medicine. You may notice shifts you didn't expect, a feeling of warmth, a sudden yawn, a deep sigh. These are signs the body is responding, the system is adjusting, the tension is unwinding. This practice is especially powerful before sleep. The body often carries unresolved tension into the night. Humming slows the breath, quiets the nervous system, and brings the heart into coherence. You don't need a full chanting session. A few minutes is enough. A few steady hums can guide the body from alertness to stillness without resistance. There is also a deeper dimension to this practice. In many spiritual traditions, sound is not just therapy. It is creation. It is how awareness expresses itself. In the Buddhist understanding, sound can be used not only to settle the mind, but to transcend the self. The repetition of a sacred name or syllable becomes a bridge between the personal and the infinite. You do not need to believe this for it to work. You only need to practice with sincerity. When you hum, you are not adding something foreign. You are awakening something native. The nervous system remembers. The cells respond. Awareness deepens. And what follows is not effortful meditation, but effortless resting. Not from exhaustion, but from alignment. As the sound softens your system, the thinking slows. The edges blur. The self becomes less defined, not lost, just no longer needing to stand apart. You begin to feel the connection between sound and silence. That one flows into the other. That sound is not a break from stillness, but an expression of it. You hum, and then you rest. The rest feels fuller. The stillness feels deeper. And so the sound becomes the key, the entry point, the reminder. You don't need to push. You only need to vibrate gently, listen inwardly, and let the body do what it already knows. Over time, this practice creates a kind of attunement. You become sensitive to your inner tone. You notice when the mind is sharp or harsh. You feel when the body is closed or open. You adjust, not with thought, but with breath, with sound, with presence. This is not a performance. It is not measured by outcome. It is experienced directly. It is lived through attention. The more you hum with awareness, the more you understand that the body is not just flesh. It is instrument. That awareness is not just watching, it is participating. That practice is not escape. It is return. Return to what is soft. Return to what is simple. Return to the vibration that connects all things without needing to explain, only to feel. And in that return, you find a stillness that doesn't resist sound, and a sound that doesn't disturb stillness. You are not trying to go anywhere. You are only learning how to be here, completely, gently, and in tune. When the sound fades back into silence and the hum softens into breath, something profound begins to take place. You start to sense that all the effort, mental, emotional, even spiritual, has been leading to this. A return not to action, not even to insight, but to rest. Not the rest that follows achievement, but the kind that comes from no longer needing to achieve. The breath settles without instruction. The body rests without needing permission. The mind no longer tries to shape reality, and you arrive at the threshold of the most misunderstood freedom, the liberation of no more doing. This is not about laziness. It's not about disconnection. It is about letting go of the constant inner movement toward becoming, the habitual drive to do, fix, change, or become more. It is a release of the belief that your value is tied to effort, that peace can only come after everything is resolved. The ego lives in striving. It feeds on comparison, expectation, unfinished projects, imagined futures. It grows stronger each time you feel incomplete. Every checklist, every future goal, every measure of worth becomes another thread tying you to the cycle of constant effort. Even in spiritual practice, the mind sneaks in through the back door. It whispers, "Try harder, go deeper, fix this part of you." It never lets you rest. But there is another way, not through apathy, but through renunciation. Not a rejection of life, but a soft refusal to grip it so tightly. When you say, "I lay down striving," you are not giving up. You are waking up. You are choosing to meet the moment without asking it to be different. You are choosing to stop negotiating with the now. Doing has its place. It helps us move through the world, care for others, grow. But the addiction to doing, to constant mental activity, to productivity as identity, keeps the nervous system in a state of agitation. It teaches the body that rest is failure, that stillness is laziness, that unless something is happening, you are falling behind. In truth, the deepest growth happens when the mind is quiet, when the breath is unhurried, when nothing is being manipulated. Insight emerges not from more doing, but from resting in what already is. From letting the wisdom of the body, the breath, the moment speak for itself. This rest is not just physical, it is mental, emotional, energetic. It is the deep release of all inner contraction, the willingness to sit without self-improvement, the radical choice to let things be, to do nothing and still be fully present. This can feel unfamiliar at first. The mind may protest. Shouldn't I be thinking about tomorrow? Shouldn't I be analyzing my day? But in this practice, the answer is no, not now, not here, not tonight. The practice of non-doing begins with a shift in posture, not the body's posture, but the inner posture, a loosening of the grip, a softening of control, a quiet allowing of whatever is here. You feel the breath, not as something to train or deepen, but simply as it is. You notice the sensations of the body, not to fix or stretch, but to acknowledge. You let the moment unfold without stepping in. This doesn't mean you stop noticing thoughts. It means you stop interacting with them. You let them rise and fall without pulling at their threads. You let go of the question, what should I do next? Because there is no next. There is only this, and in this, you begin to feel what effort has hidden, your natural state of awareness, not sleepy, not spaced out, but alert and undemanding, restful and whole, aware without needing a task. You may find that this kind of rest brings emotion. The tension of years may rise in your chest. You may feel grief for how long you've pushed, how little space you've given yourself to simply be. Let it come. Let the tears fall if they need to. They are part of the release. They are part of the body remembering how to stop performing. The world may not validate this rest. It may praise the endless striving, the constant production, the identity built on doing. But deep inside, something wiser knows this is not sustainable. That peace is not a reward for having done enough. It is your birthright. It is what arises when you stop chasing something more. To live without clinging to doing is not to abandon life. It is to meet life fully. You eat, you walk, you breathe, but without needing each act to prove something. You let go of multitasking, of mental rehearsing, of imagining the next problem. You just do what you are doing. And when you are not doing, you let yourself be still. Stillness is not inaction, it is undisturbed presence. You can move through the world with stillness in the heart. You can speak without effort. You can respond without tension, because you are no longer trying to get somewhere else. You are here. And when the ego rises again, and it will, you recognize it. The urge to improve, to rush, to criticize, to compare, you see it, and you smile. You do not follow. You return to breath, to sensation, to the ground of now. Over time, this becomes a rhythm. You begin to trust the intelligence of rest. You feel how clarity arises on its own, how the body heals itself, how peace does not need to be chased. It only needs to be allowed. You begin to live more gently. You listen more fully. You stop interrupting silence. You stop demanding from the moment. And the mind, once filled with plans and questions, learns a new phrase. I do not need to do anything right now. These words become sacred, a mantra not of withdrawal, but of wisdom. not of giving up, but of giving in to the quiet truth that you are enough without the performance. Let that be your last thought before sleep. Not a plan for tomorrow, not a review of today, just the soft, clear offering. I lay down, striving. I release the grip. I rest in what already is. And in that rest, I return to myself, not as a task to complete, but as a presence that never needed to be earned. When you stop striving and begin to rest in simple being, the surface finally quiets. There is no more pressure to figure things out, no more movement toward the next task, no more urgency to achieve anything. In that stillness, a different kind of awareness begins to rise, one that is not focused on what must change, but on what has already been given. The mind begins to open like a window, not to the future, but to what came before. And through that opening, something warm returns, not as thought, but as remembrance. This is the doorway to recollection. In the teachings of Anusati, recollection is not sentimental daydreaming. It is a practice, a skill, a way of reconnecting to inner truth through remembering what nourished the heart. Not every memory holds this power, but some do. A touch, a word, a place, a glance. These are not just stored experiences, they are containers of presence. They hold a resonance that can still be felt when remembered with mindfulness. This is not about romanticizing the past. It is about honoring the parts of your story that supported your becoming. The moments where safety was real, where kindness was extended, where love was given or received in ways that bypassed the mind and went straight to the core. When you practice Anusati, you do not get lost in memory. You consciously call it forth. You breathe into it. You feel what it brings up. You let it wash over you, not to escape the now, but to deepen your sense of connection to it. This kind of nostalgia is not clinging. It is nourishment. It reminds the body what safety feels like. It tells the nervous system, you have been held before. You have known warmth. You have seen light. Even if your present moment is full of uncertainty, this memory becomes a grounding thread. The practice begins with stillness. You settle the breath. You soften the body. And then you ask gently, what moment of true connection do I remember? Not dramatic, not loud, just sincere. A smile, a friend's voice, a quiet walk. A time you felt whole, even if just for a second. You don't analyze it. You enter it. You let the feelings rise. Maybe tears come. Maybe a smile forms. Maybe your chest opens just a little. This is the energy of remembrance doing its work. You're not chasing the past. You're receiving its echo with presence. This practice deepens gratitude because you begin to see that your life has not only been struggle, it has also been shaped by tenderness. And that tenderness may have been brief, but it was real. It left a mark, and that mark is still accessible. Gratitude doesn't mean ignoring suffering. It means refusing to forget everything else. It means holding a fuller picture. When you remember acts of kindness, you also remember that you are worthy of them, that someone, somewhere, saw something good in you. That connection is not a fantasy. It has already happened. This remembrance becomes a form of inner refuge. When the present feels heavy, you are not required to pretend. You can look back, not to live in the past, but to anchor in what is timeless. The feeling of being loved is not limited to one moment. When recalled with mindfulness, it becomes present again, real again, felt again. Recollection also awakens humility. You remember not only what you received, but what you offered. Times you listened with your whole self. Times you showed up when it mattered. These memories are not to build ego. They are to affirm your capacity for care, your role in someone else's story of peace. Sometimes, in the darkness of now, it's easy to forget the light you've carried. This practice helps you remember. It brings you back to the truth that you are more than your most recent thought, more than your last mood, more than the hardest thing that ever happened. Anusati can take many forms, recalling the goodness of others, the warmth of family, the teachings of a guide, the peace of nature, even the presence of a stranger who offered compassion. All of these can be used to restore balance. You can also recollect the qualities you've cultivated. Times you were patient when it was difficult, times you forgave, times you walked away when anger wanted you to stay. These memories are not pride, they are encouragement. They are evidence of growth, of transformation, of your ability to choose something higher. When practiced at night, this recollection becomes especially powerful. It prepares the heart for rest. Instead of falling asleep with a mind full of what's missing, you fall asleep with the memory of what's already been given. You drift not into planning, but into peace. The body feels held, the breath slows, the inner space opens. This doesn't require great memory, it requires sincerity. The memory may be faint, but the feeling it carries is alive. That feeling is what you rest in. You can speak these memories aloud, you can write them down, or you can simply sit with them, breathing slowly, letting them unfold without force. And you'll notice that over time, this practice changes how you live. You begin to look for new moments to remember. You become more aware of beauty, of presence, of simple acts of care, because you know these are not small. They are the threads that hold you together. The more you recollect, the more your mind learns to value what is lasting. Not just achievement or praise, but presence, connection, love. These are the treasures of the heart, and they are not gone. They are alive in you. Anusati is the practice of touching them again, not with nostalgia that longs, but with mindfulness that honors. It is a way of saying, I have known peace, I have known connection, I have been touched by love. And in that knowing, you become less afraid, less isolated, more rooted. You carry your own light, and that light does not fade. It returns every time you remember, every time you pause, every time you breathe into what made you whole, even just once. Let the memory live again, and let it become the ground you walk on, even now. After recalling moments that shaped you with gentleness and gratitude, a quiet sense of wholeness begins to form. It isn't built on fixing anything. It grows from seeing clearly what has already been offered, what already lives inside you. That clarity is not loud. It rests under the noise. And from that still-rooted presence, a new kind of question arises. Not the kind that searches for answers, but the kind that gently dissolves the need for them. Not to build more stories, but to release the ones that no longer serve. This is the moment to begin asking what is no longer true. The mind clings to stories because they once made sense. They once protected you, helped you feel certain, gave structure to confusion. But over time, the story becomes heavier than the truth. The belief begins to feel like a cage, and the self you were defending no longer fits who you have become. Asking what is no longer true is not about correcting yourself. It is about releasing what no longer needs to be carried. This is not ordinary inquiry. It is not a demand. It is a gentle question that meets you at the edge of your becoming. It lives in the same space as a koan, not to be solved, but to be held, lived with, let into your breath and your bones. You sit quietly. You ask the question. What is no longer true? You listen. You feel. You don't rush the answer. You don't force a response. The question works slowly, not to fill your mind, but to clear it. It loosens what has hardened. It softens what has been gripped too tightly. And in that softening, truth appears, not as a concept, but as release. Maybe it was once true that you had to please everyone to feel safe. Maybe it was once true that love had to be earned. Maybe it was once true that silence meant rejection. That vulnerability was danger. That strength meant never asking for help. But is it still true? You ask again, not from doubt, but from sincerity. You let the question echo inside the body. You feel where tension rises. You feel what contracts. And in that contact, you begin to see. The story still lives, but the truth has moved on. You are no longer who you were when you first believed it. The story stayed because it went unquestioned, not because it was still real. This practice is not about rejecting the past. It's about letting the present speak louder. Asking what is no longer true invites you to return to this moment without assumption. It challenges the mind's habit of certainty. It brings curiosity into places where defense once lived. It interrupts automatic identification. And in that pause, something softer enters. You realize that change is not always visible. Sometimes it begins with no longer believing a thought that used to run your life, not because you argued with it, but because you finally saw through it. This is how the question works. It doesn't aim to change the mind. It reveals what is already shifting. It invites you to release the weight of old identities, to stop living by rules you no longer agree with. What am I still holding that was never mine? What defense am I still using for a threat that no longer exists? What identity do I keep performing because I forgot I could stop? These questions are not meant to shame. They are acts of kindness, of presence, of gentle honesty. They remind you that belief is not the same as truth. That story is not the same as being. That you are allowed to change the shape of your inner world. This is the heart of spiritual inquiry, not to accumulate more knowledge, but to remove what blocks knowing, to dissolve what no longer fits, to stand in the clear space that opens once the illusion is named. You ask quietly, what is no longer true? And then you listen. Maybe you hear silence. Maybe you feel grief. Maybe you notice a memory rise. Whatever comes, you meet it, without rush, without trying to categorize. You sit with the question like a companion, a lantern that reveals what doesn't need to be held anymore. And sometimes the answer won't come in words. It will come in breath, in ease, in the way your shoulders relax for no reason, in the way you stop rehearsing an old argument, in the way you say no with less fear, in the way you stop needing to explain your worth. This kind of insight doesn't arrive through logic. It arises from clarity, the clarity that only silence can provide, the clarity that emerges when you are willing to let the old version of you fall away. You don't need to rush into what is true. You only need to step away from what no longer is. That is enough. That is how you make room. Koan-like inquiry teaches the mind to soften its grip on answers. You stop solving and start seeing. You stop trying to be right and start asking what's real. And in that space, transformation happens, not as force, but as return. You return to a self that is no longer trapped in stories, a self that doesn't need to justify or defend, a self that is curious, not controlling, a self that grows, not by collecting, but by shedding. This practice can be repeated often. You bring the question into your day, into your breath, into your reflection. And with each asking, you notice a little more space, a little more quiet, a little more honesty. It doesn't require hours of meditation. It requires presence, willingness, the courage to pause and look at what's been living unquestioned. You begin to notice patterns dissolve. Old narratives stop driving your reactions. You don't believe every story your mind offers. You don't fear the unknown in the same way, because you've seen that the known was often just a habit. Let this question live with you. Let it whisper when tension rises. Let it speak when fear returns. Let it guide you back to now. Not to find the right answer, but to remember who you are when you stop believing what is no longer true. As the old stories begin to dissolve and you stop clinging to what no longer reflects who you are, a new spaciousness arises. Not empty, not vague, just honest. There is a quiet inside you now, one that doesn't need to explain itself. You are not lost in confusion, and you are not forcing direction. You are simply here. And from this space, a new kind of guidance becomes available, one that doesn't come from memory or fear or habit, one that doesn't chase or resist. This guidance has always been close. It lives inside you, and it waits patiently to be consulted. Now is the time to turn toward the inner bodhisattva, not as a distant ideal, not as something above or outside you, but as the most stable part of your own awareness. The presence within that is unshaken by praise or blame, the clarity that does not react from fear, the wisdom that arises not from knowing everything, but from being open to everything. This is not imagination. It is a deeper relationship with your own capacity for compassion, for truth, for calm integrity. When you no longer look for answers from the part of you shaped by survival and story, you begin to notice another voice, softer, slower, rooted. This voice does not need to win. It does not need to justify. It speaks when you ask, and it waits when you don't. To consult the inner bodhisattva means learning to trust this place, to pause before reacting, to listen for the answer that does not come from insecurity, but from presence. It means slowing down enough to ask a deeper question. What would the highest part of me say right now? What would clarity choose? What would compassion do? This practice does not make you passive. It gives you depth. It gives you time to respond from what matters, not from conditioning, not from defense, but from wisdom. The bodhisattva within is not a fantasy. It is your nature, untouched by fear, unclouded by ego, unshaken by circumstances. To connect with this part of yourself, you must step out of urgency. The moment you believe you must act quickly, that you must defend yourself, that you must prove something, you are no longer listening to wisdom. You are responding from contraction. The inner bodhisattva does not operate from contraction. It waits until you are present enough to receive. Sometimes this guidance comes as a simple breath, a steadying silence, a clear, "not this." It doesn't always give answers, but it always clears the fog. And in that clarity, you know how to move or how to wait. The bodhisattva doesn't speak in rules. It doesn't shame or scold. It simply reminds you of what you already know, but forgot in the noise. It reminds you to be kind even when you are tired, to speak honestly even when afraid, to act in alignment even when unseen. This isn't about being perfect. The bodhisattva doesn't expect that. It understands human contradiction. It knows that you will stumble, that you will forget, but it is always ready to return the moment you do. It is never impatient. It is never absent. It only waits for your attention. You can make this a practice. You can pause in stillness and invite the inner guide to speak. You can ask questions that aren't looking for quick solutions. What would it look like to be at peace here? What truth have I not yet accepted? What would love do with this moment? You breathe, you listen. You let the answer form not in your mind, but in your body. You feel for the response that brings ease, not just relief. You feel for the one that opens, not the one that tightens. Over time, this becomes familiar. You no longer need to analyze every decision. You return to the presence that knows how to act without overthinking. You begin to recognize the energy of truth, not because it sounds good, but because it feels grounded, because it asks nothing of your ego and everything of your heart. The bodhisattva within doesn't avoid suffering. It enters it with compassion. It doesn't deny difficulty. It meets it with steadiness. And you learn to do the same, not because you are strong, but because you are willing to be soft. Even in confusion, you can ask this part of you to lead. Even in anger, you can breathe and wait until the answer comes from depth, not reactivity. You are not silencing your feelings. You are creating space around them, so that when they move, you are still here, still whole. This practice is not abstract. It is practical, immediate, and steadying. You begin to bring it into moments that used to unravel you. A conversation that used to make you defensive now becomes a chance to speak from peace. A challenge that used to overwhelm now becomes a space to choose wisely. The more you consult the inner bodhisattva, the more natural it becomes. You feel less rushed. You no longer need to prove your worth. You start to live in line with your values, not because someone told you to, but because you've remembered how to listen to the voice within that always knew. This voice will never demand. It will never shame. It will only wait. Every time you return, it welcomes you without hesitation. And this is how you begin to live in harmony with yourself. By trusting the guidance that does not rise from fear. By remembering that wisdom doesn't shout. It whispers through presence, through breath, through stillness. So the next time you feel lost, confused, reactive, or uncertain, pause. Ask gently, what would the bodhisattva within me do now? And then wait. Not for approval, not for instruction, but for the quiet shift that says, now you're listening. Now you're ready to lead with love, with clarity, with truth. Not because you've figured everything out, but because you've stopped abandoning the part of you that always knew how to return. After listening to the quiet strength of your inner bodhisattva, something deep begins to settle. You are no longer reacting from urgency or doubt. You are no longer trying to solve yourself. The mind doesn't need answers when it feels safe. The heart doesn't grasp when it remembers wholeness. In this space, there is nothing to reach for, nothing to fix. The only thing left is to let go, not out of defeat, but out of wisdom. Not because everything is resolved, but because it doesn't need to be. This is where the final release becomes possible. This is the Dharma of surrender. True surrender is not collapse. It's not turning away. It's the exact opposite. It is full contact with reality without resistance. It is meeting the present moment without needing it to be different. It is opening the hands that were grasping, loosening the mind that was gripping, letting the breath move without trying to shape it. It is choosing peace over control. Surrender before sleep is not laziness or escape. It is the final movement of trust. It is the soft laying down of everything that was carried, not with a plan to pick it up again in the morning, but with full willingness to let it go forever if needed. Not from apathy, but from insight. The understanding that peace isn't something you arrive at by pushing. It's what arises when the pushing stops. In the deepest teachings of the Buddha, the heart of liberation is the release from craving. Nibbana is not a place. It is not a goal to reach. It is the extinguishing of the fire of attachment. It is the moment the mind no longer chases, no longer fights, no longer clings. And while full awakening may take lifetimes, we can taste its fragrance each time we surrender deeply. Before sleep, this becomes especially powerful. The mind is naturally softening. The body is letting go. This is the ideal moment to practice release, not as technique, but as presence. You don't need to resolve your thoughts. You don't need to finish your thinking. You only need to allow what is already dissolving to keep dissolving. Begin with the body. Feel it resting. Feel where it touches the ground or the bed. Notice that gravity is already doing the work. You are being held. Nothing is required of you. Every muscle that relaxes becomes a silent act of trust. Every breath that moves without control becomes a reminder that life is not asking you to manage everything. Then move into the breath. Feel the inhale rise gently. Let the exhale lengthen. Don't shape it. Let it leave on its own. Feel how the breath is already surrendering. Each out-breath is a letting go, not just of air, but of effort, of identity, of needing to be anyone at all. Now bring your attention to the mind. Don't fight thought. Don't try to silence it. Just stop following. Let the thoughts come and go like wind across water. You don't need to hold them. You don't need to name them. You don't need to fix anything they say. They are not you. They are not permanent. They do not need to be understood right now. Say silently, I release this day. I release this mind. I release this self. These are not dramatic statements. They are gentle permissions. The mind has worked. The heart has felt. The body has moved. And now it is time to return everything to stillness. Surrender is not weakness, it is the highest strength. It is the strength to not cling even to clarity, to not hold even peace too tightly, to not grasp even at understanding. It is the state of resting in what is without needing anything else to happen. And from this resting, something deeper unfolds. A stillness that is not dependent on silence. A peace that does not depend on outcome. A presence that doesn't need to be earned. It reveals itself only when you stop chasing. You are not abandoning the world. You are releasing your grip on it. You are not giving up. You are giving back. Letting the day return to itself. Letting your thoughts return to space. Letting your breath return to its rhythm. Surrender does not erase responsibility. It renews it. Because when you release the inner tension, what returns is clarity. Right action rises from peace, not pressure. Kindness comes from spaciousness, not effort. Compassion flows naturally when there is no self to defend. In this surrender, there is nothing left to do, nothing to become. The deepest healing is already underway. You are not falling asleep to escape. You are returning to stillness as your natural state. Feel what remains when effort fades. It is not absence, it is fullness. It is the presence that has never needed improvement. It is the mind unburdened, the body ungripped, the heart unclenched. Let the breath remind you again. Inhale, life arriving. Exhale, attachment leaving. Each cycle is a small awakening. Each breath is a practice in letting go. You are not what you thought. You are not your plans. You are not your regrets. You are not your unfinished business. You are what remains when all of that is set down. Let the day be complete. Let the moment be whole. Let the silence be enough. And say softly within yourself, I surrender this form. I surrender this thought. I surrender this night. Then rest, not as a task, not as a goal, but as your natural state, free, open, and already home. You've just spent over 3 hours returning to the parts of yourself that don't ask for more, don't chase, and don't resist. You've listened to the voice beneath the noise, the one that doesn't speak in pressure, but in peace. You've sat with the truth that you don't need to be anything more than present to be whole. You've practiced laying down the weight of the day. You've breathed through tension, softened the grip of control, watched old stories loosen their hold, and allowed silence to guide you back home. From mindful breath to sacred sound, from compassion to surrender, each practice has offered you not escape, but remembrance. This was not just a guided session. It was a ceremony of release, a deep exhale for the heart, a way to say, without needing to say, I am allowed to rest. So now, as your body settles and your mind softens, ask yourself one gentle question. What can I finally let go of tonight? If this journey brought you calm, clarity, or even just a moment of ease, let us know. Leave a comment below and share which practice resonated with you the most. Your words might be the reason someone else begins their own path to peace. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There's more waiting for you, more moments of stillness, more deep reflection, and more reminders that you are never far from peace. Hit that bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Now, breathe deeply. Let go fully. Rest completely. Good night, and may peace stay with you long after the screen fades to black.